Just in time. A little bit late. How's it going? This is Scripts Nerd, SCP CRMP, aka Lack of Lepers. 3 minutes late. That's pretty early in the scheme of things. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Today is going to be our second of many SCP Weekly Roundup. So we have got a week's worth of SCPs to get through today. And these will be synopsized in sort of a gauntlet style. 5 words per each. That'll be done over the next few days, and that'll show up on the Confic Magazine YouTube. So check that out if you would rather have all of this information atomized into about a minute and a half. So this time, let me get this sharing going on here. We can get right down to business. We had less articles this week than we did last week. I think it was 35 last week. This week we are at, let me not count incorrectly, 22. So that doesn't tell the whole story, of course. Some are shorter than others, but that is good. So maybe we can either dilate the time with fewer articles or finish quicker. I don't know. I want to thank you all for joining. If you have any comments about these SCPs or just things in general, feel free to throw up a comment, and be sure to check us tomorrow for our Saturday show on SCP Meta, which is of the same name, SCP Meta, where we talk about all kind of crap that goes on every week. There's always crap going on. But I want to thank you for coming in. Let me do a quick check here. I think everything looks good. Okay, so let me get my notes up here. We are going to start last Thursday, which is the 22nd. And we go up to all the articles that were posted that Thursday night, so last night. So Thursdays to Thursdays. And so what we'll do is find the first one, and that one is 6848. You are up, 6848. There we go. Yeah, 22nd of April. So let's start here. Let's see what we're doing. Hope y'all are doing well tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. Oh boy, I remember this one now. Can't believe it's been this long. Do y'all notice something immediately that's a little topical? Yes, you do. It's a cat. It's a kitty. This one has text around it, so that's novel. So what is this article about? Let's get our handy dandy and trustworthy AI, Brian, to tell us a little synopsis about this article. Brian, please go ahead.
An anomaly that affects cats, causing them to disappear after running fast and reappear later. Basically they vanish into an alt dimension once they hit 88 miles per hour. Back to the Cativerse, 88 miles per hour.
Very good reference there, Brian. So humorous. Those of us who are old may get that. All right, so yeah, this article, so I'm afraid that the fish trend is giving way to a cat trend. You have these sort of bubbles of memetics pop up to the surface of SCP, and they only get so big before they pop, but they are there. So this one, as you can see, certainly is not apologetic about that. So this is cats all the way down. We've got an MTF, Mobile Task Force. They're called the Fish Lickers, so that's nice little touch. Yeah. So basically what this mobile task force has to do is monitor cats. So this article is all about cats, not just this funny MTF nod. It's really all about it. So immediately just in reading this, once again, if you've read this, if you have thoughts, please go ahead. Let me know what you think. But so when I read this article, it really doesn't seem to mind being a little ridiculous. I think the 18 rating up here, which is interesting, it's on the left side of the page, usually not that way. Disruption class dark is fine here. That looks better than the full-fledged ACS, so I appreciate that. So anyway, and then we get a little more ridiculous because the director head of this SCP is Director Jones Fisher. So we're sort of meshing the two bubbles. This is sort of the point at which they combine, and this very article may represent that sort of sort of raindrop, capturing more raindrops on the way down the window, and it gets too full and it just, becomes too heavy to sustain itself, or it's a bubble and it pops. So hopefully this bubble is going to pop. It's a lot like the stock market, where you have these momentum stocks, these mimetic stocks that are just bound to pop. All right. So anyway, continuing with this article, it later goes on to designate an alternate dimension, and it calls that alternate dimension the Catverse. Cativerse or Catverse? Let's see. Cativerse. Yeah, Cativerse. There it is right there. Alternatively, this dimension is known, there's a spacing issue right there that no one has fixed. This dimension is known as the cat dimension, or alternatively, the Cativerse. It is suspected that all cats have entered the cat dimension during their lifetime. So basically, as Brian said, you have an anomaly where just any normal cat, so basically every cat is anomalous. That's one way to look at this. The other way is to make the behavior itself anomalous, and that's what this author decided to do. But basically, any cat can run, and if it runs sufficiently fast enough, it will disappear, kind of like 88 miles per hour, and go into this alternate dimension. They talk about a Rosen Fortune bridge, colloquially known as a way, but they disappear. So basically, imagine, once they're in this universe, imagine cat versions of everything in the Foundation, and you got it. That's it. But it's Kardashev too. So cats in this alternate dimension are actually more progressive, more evolved technologically, at least, than humans. So the Cativerse, I gotta pick on for just 1 second. We see an image here, clearly a piece of art, some odd weather phenomena going on. Looks like there's an advertisement here in, I don't know what language that is, and then a few cats, which are quite clearly all cutouts. They're all the same little bit of clip art that someone just copy pasted and made a little smaller here, and then just horizontally mirrored and put there. So all the cats are tilting their head looking at this beautiful oversized moon. I suppose the moon in this dimension does not howl. I suppose that's what's going on there. But anyways, so I think not only is that a pretty bad attempt at a portmanteau, the Cativerse, but believe it or not, I was surprised. It actually already exists in universe. So as you can see, this is linked, and if you go to that, it's a tale from quite a long time ago, I think. Let's double check that. MathBrush in 2019, so it's not that old. MathBrush was a breakout participant, really, in the 4000 contest with his Socratic containment procedures that adopted a series of collapsibles, one after the other, that obeyed the Socratic form of back and forth, asking questions or not. It's 4,500, so if you haven't checked that out, I do recommend that one. There's a question and an answer, and a question and an answer, and it's very good. So MathBrush made the tale about the Cativerse, and this individual has decided to make a skip about it. So let's actually get into this. What do I think about it? I do not think this is a good article. I think it's rather long as well, so I can't recommend it. It does have a lot of collapsibles going on here. But let me get into a little bit why I don't think this is a good article. I think that the rating of 18 is absolutely appropriate. It's been on the site for almost a week now. Oops, keep doing that. And I think it shouldn't go up any higher. I think that's about right. Okay, so Ascendance tells us that this Cativerse is identical to baseline reality with all of the elements, entities, and cosmological structures of baseline reality. Here's that line right there. But the supplied image that we already sort of poked fun at shows this outsized moon and gratuitous meteor trails showing otherwise that it's not the same as baseline reality. There's a lot of things apparently going on here differently. As do, by the way, the subsequent video logs, which also note that the sky is basically all rainbows. So that's different. I think that's kind of neat, actually, by the way. I like that image. That's pretty good. Probably the only good thing about the article, in my opinion. All right. So let's get to the exploration log. These are somewhat tagged. Oh, look, somebody changed it. So before when I was reading this last week, this div right here, this Project Alloloris into the Cataverse, was black, and of course the image, which is really nice, I like that image, it's a nice insignia, was also black. And I think someone had pointed this out, so that's probably why they changed it. But wow, looks much better now. It was black on black. All right. So an odd thing happens in this log right here. This is an exploration log where basically you have a team of Charlie Bravo and Alpha go in and investigate this dimensional anomaly. They can somehow get in, and they have Hume detectors and everything like this. And then you can already see spacing issues all throughout this. It kind of gives up after the first step into it, and just collapses all the spacing. So this is incorrect format. Of course, that's not enough to sync an article, but it just continues and continues, and I don't suppose anybody has pointed this out to the individual, and if they have, the individual has not corrected them, so that's no good. There's a really weird moment here. So at the second half of the exploration log, the command says, try to be peaceful and do not engage the creatures. If any of them can speak in human language, try and interact with it. We're opening the video log so you don't have to relay everything back to us. And of course that means that this whole entire time up here, and then a little sum of the second one, the video feeds were for some reason off. These participants were basically having to use their words to describe things when it seems they could have had their video cameras on the whole time. We do have a little shout out to Josie the half cat, so I think that's a pretty tasteful inclusion given the subject matter here. There's a missed opportunity, I think, in here when the Foundation operatives are talking to the cats, which of course are sapient and can speak. And then this line, you're classified as species of interest in this dimension, species of interest 002. And of course this is Charlie, so a Foundation operative agent talking about the cats. I think that this is a missed opportunity. It would have been a little funnier, I think, to invert that and have the cats talk to the Foundation personnel about being a species of interest, 002, and then you could even go a little further and be like, okay, so what's the 001? And of course that leads to all funny kind of questions given the overlap out of universe with the SCP 001. But you could even end it as something as goofy as like, oh well, species of interest 1 are dogs, clearly, and you guys are too. So that's a missed opportunity. I think that was a compositional incompletion that could have been caught for quite the touchdown, and I think it would have strengthened the article a little bit more because it would have played into some of the more comical vibes of the article. If you haven't been able to tell already with the Fisher, the fish licking MTF, this tries to be a little comical. I don't think it strays too far from a main list to where we would posit the dreaded criticism of this maybe needing to be a J. I don't think it quite goes that far, but it's really, really on the edge. So for example, by the end of the first addenda, we have this, and you can kind of see it. It's very small, even on desktop, but the caption says, sketch of the entity called Assam, which was the name of the main cat speaking, drawn by a member of MTFT 15 Charlie. So that's Theta 15, so MTF Theta 15. So basically we are asked to believe that a tactical response agent, think of the most military bro dude with tactical gear everywhere. He's got suppressors on suppressors. He LARPs around his house, in the full kit kind of guy. Taking the time to draw out, this is a pixelated picture, so drawing a pixel art picture of what is just flat out the Nyan cat, the meme, just played straight, just I suppose it's trying to do a little bit of like historical retconning, kind of like you see that a lot in the SCP, where they kind of like give a different story for some well-known event. which we'll get to actually in this stream, a way better example. But I guess that's the best interpretation, the most favorable interpretation of what's going on here. But it doesn't do a great job. It's just the cat. So, I mean, it's almost like SCP-PL Cat J. Almost. It's a little shout out. But anyway, it's included unironically. The MFT Charlie individual is apparently somewhat skilled and proficient at pixel art, maybe with too much free time when they're not investigating cat worlds. And the second collapsible here was where this problem was with the art. This is where the article really goes from it tries to be a little charming, and it just totally craps up the stage at this point. We have these paratech addenda, and so you have a lot of technobabble going on here. Scranton Rosen Fortune wormhole drill is used to intercept. You got a thalamic emission transmitter used to output signals of thalamic energy directed at the above field. You have a Zik narrative layer linker, a machine developed by Dr. Placeholder McD in collaboration with the pataphysics department, utilizing Murphy's Law's narrative flattening in order to complete the acceleration process of selective narrative vortexes. I mean, what? And then I don't really know what this one is, but anyway, that's cross-linked as well. Yeah, so the problem with this is obviously it goes really, really hard. It's kind of trying to do its best impersonation of Placeholder McDoctorate, and it does a pretty good impression in that a lot of this is just a lot of adipose descriptive content that doesn't really give us a lot to grab onto. It's a lot like chewing bubble gum and trying to read into the chewing sound like meaningful sentences. It's just hard to do. And then really what happens next is when they try to enact all of these things, you have this sort of event log, with timestamps saying when this was done and that was done. And basically everything that was rolled out here as if a red carpet is just completely ripped away here. So we've just read, 3 incredibly dense paragraphs of, paratechnological explanation for it really to have an immediately no payoff. I mean, it's all instantly defeated. And so it's just a little strange to do that. It's kind of jerking the reader around, and the reader's left asking, why did I have to read all this stuff if it's just going to die? So yeah, it's sabotaged by cats who send messages that they have, this unconvincing sort of faux wisdom about themselves, and it sort of devolves. So let's kind of look at that. So they try to fire up the machines, and you have this like wise cat speak like this: our stories take different paths, you walk different roads, you are written by different men, yada 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 yada. And so it kind of devolves over time into just this. You can sort of see it just kind of the brains of this addendum kind of unfold in real time, and it kind of gets smooth at the end there, to where basically it's just there's a cat, there's a cat, there's a cat, there's a cat. There's lots of cats. There's cats everywhere. I'm a cat. Thank you for the shelter. So I guess if this is humorous to you, this is a stimulant on the article where you maybe can laugh a little more, but I just never thought this was funny. And then the cat antics really continue with an 05 credential check, so that's of course ending the article. So we click on that, and of course it has a implanted emo cringe try hard message of goodbye. At least it isn't spaced out, every letter having its own space between it. But basically you have this like just nothing is safe. Everything is catified. So you have to enter your security credentials. Does the Black Moon howl? It used to, but now it prefers meowing. So this note, shielded by 05 importance, is a letter from a cat, just like what we got up here, telling of their history, exactly like what we got up here. And it ends, it's kind of like a really bad it's like a live journal entry, basically. It has just a excessive amount of crosslinks. I mean, I don't understand how you're supposed to, how this is supposed to be useful or meaningful. And then, of course, it punctuates with a smiley face emoji. So, when I say that this is a bad article, hopefully now, walking through this article with you, you can see. So just to put that on top, like we said, there's a ton of non-spacing issues after punctuation. They're really immediate, one immediately after, and everywhere thereafter. So usually this happens after sentences end, but also after commas mid-sentence. So I don't have an example right now, but we did see just in the wild, throw a dart at a board sentence, and it had a spacing grammatical issue. And that, the logs have those spacing issues that we talked about. And then if we actually go to the comments and kind of just see, by the way, that was funny. I don't know if you saw that, but the ad, it's not going to be the same. But this ad just showed up as a litter. So, once you get to the comments, you have the upvotes expressing themselves as what I would call bot behavior. So there's a lot of terms you could use for this kind of response. You could get a little pejorative with it and call it NPC reactivity, because that's really what it is. You could also call it bot behavior. If the SCP Wiki is going to ban people because they're indistinguishable from being underage, why aren't we applying the same rule to bot behavior? Because basically it's a little more advanced than bot, because it's calling on a different article. But that's sort of the tier of processing that goes into this, and I think that's the only one here, which is nice. But yeah, so this kind of stuff, just wanted to take a minute and point that out as often as we can. This is sort of bot level NPC applause, just straight up meme applause. This is something that you would expect to see, on an article that has no problem flaunting the Nyan cat, unironically. So this sort of article brings out this sort of upvote comment. Why it was good is one word. So, once again, the amount of crosslinks are absolutely excessive, distracting. The CSS on this too is I kind of glossed over that, but it looks over here kind of like someone's Bandcamp, page in the background, or SoundCloud page, where you've got this like abstract sort of thing. It's really a planet, and I think there's a spot in this where it actually shows up. Maybe you don't see it on desktop as well, but there's another little moon in this background image, and it can show up if you're on mobile, like in the middle of this text. So, I mean, it doesn't really have anything to do with the CSS theme. The content of the article doesn't have anything to do with the CSS theme. The CSS theme is the Beholder program, which I have no idea what that is. The article did not tell me what that was. Rediscovering space, as if we're in outer space with planets, and really this image is the only thing that this article ever has anything to do with space at all. So it's sort of a mismatch. It just feels like just grabbing for anything that might be attention-getting, something just to bolster the lack of more substance to this article. It's a bad idea to just put an actively distracting CSS theme when you don't really have a good reason for it. So this is this article, SCP-6848. I certainly would not recommend this one. It is long, so usually if an article is bad, I'll still recommend it. Now, don't get me wrong, a recommendation or lack thereof is not the same thing as an upvote, downvote. I can think an article is terrible and recommend that you read it, because it might be important to do so. But in this case, just its length, it's really a low budget sort of article when it comes to all the components that you would look for in a good one. The tone, the structure, the story is rather flimsy, rather limp of a story. And once again, just by the crosslinks alone, it just seems to try a little too hard to prop itself up via the use of other people's success. So not a great one. All right, let's move on to the next one, UIU 6413. And Brian, since obviously you're a AI and you can just zoom through this stuff quick, why don't you just give us a synopsis here?
Anomaly, or oddity, per the UU format, is a vacuum-like spatial anomaly in the wall of a saloon.
Yeah, so let's take a look at it. This is a CSS theme, I think it's called Aces and Eights, Astounding Tales, fresh from the West. And this is actually, I think, designed by Rounder House. If it wasn't designed by Rounder House, it was at least uploaded by him. And there's two things to say about this immediately. The first thing I thought of was the RPC New Frontiers. And so I had to do a date comparison, but basically this came way, way, way before the RPC New Frontiers. Let's see, Authority, New Frontiers. I can't spell today. Here's the New Frontier format. You can see they're kind of similar. They both use basically these sort of slightly burnt beiges to sort of convey kind of the old aged paper tone to this. And I think that while the Aces and Eights obviously predated the New Frontier format, and of course has the argument from First Mover, it has those credentials and that street cred going for it. I do think that the New Frontier is a better CSS theme by far. I think the borders are well defined. Everything is sort of well integrated. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I love this wooden background here. And then compared to that, you have this awkward red line, which really it almost doesn't know what to do with itself. It's trying to pay homage to the Sigma 9 theme of the site, but it just doesn't look good at all. It's sort of garish and sticks out. And then of course you have really a lot of great details in this Frontier CSS, including the circling of any links, kind of like you're just circling something back in the day with a marker or a Sharpie or something, whatever they had. So so I mean, once again, SCPs got the first mover argument and the first mover advantage, but I think RPC ultimately did a lot better. So Brian is correct. This is a UIU, which is the Unusual Incidents Unit. That's sort of the FBI, CIA-esque. I think it's actually FBI. Variant of the SCP Foundation, doing similar things and having a similar format. Of course, everything is slightly varied as well from this. So this is a very short article. It really gets a lot done with not a lot of time, which is always a pleasure to see. So as you may kind of get from what we've already talked about, this takes a dip back into the Old West setting and sets the unionized or the Union Foundation against their Confederate counterparts, and it really plays this to good effect. And let's see, what else can we say about this one? I do love the casting of the addenda here. The addenda are called additional complications. Additional complication 1, additional complication 2. So this article, once again, is about a sort of spatial anomaly that's situated in the wall of a good old-fashioned spit in the spit bucket saloon from the Wild Wild West. You even have this nice image with the main street right here, whereupon there has been many a revolver draw. And so, just like its form, which is short, this article really has a lot of simple and effective horror. Familiar things are sort of baked into here and then just given a slight twist to give it sort of that uncanny, unsettling vibe. For example, the image and feeling of falling, which here is twisted into the anomalous hole, and instead of falling, of course, you're sort of falling at a 90-degree angle, to be exact, into the hole as opposed to down into the earth. So it takes very believable turns, the narrative does, such as the complication of someone wanting to buy the property that the anomaly is part of after it had been covered up by a sort of disinformation or suppression campaign. So this starts a bidding war that the Foundation has to participate in order to sustain its veil regarding this anomaly. And the containment methods they use in here are just very resourceful, making use of whatever's hanging around just to, once again, really good effect. So for example, we have basically 2 agents sitting near the wall of the anomaly in the establishment. This happens a little later on. Appearing as regulars, just sort of the 2 guys that are always there. It's their spot. They always sit in the spot. If you ever go to you ever frequent a joint, maybe you know that there's regulars that show up there. I certainly know there were when I used to work in the restaurants every day. So that's basically used interestingly here. So the Foundation has, the UIU has their agents just kind of sitting in the booth that's right next to this anomaly. So I thought that was pretty clever. And then, of course, it gets a little dramatic when it's surmised that all parties involved in this, even the ones that shouldn't be, seem to know about the anomaly. It's expertly written. It's very clear this author knows what they're doing. It's easy to tell from this that they've probably been doing this a long time. Just effortless, muscle memory sort of skill going on here. And there's a really nice sort of like aha mix going on here of 2 different sort of tonalities and lore, which is the UIU and the aces and eights. I don't know if that's been done before. I'm not familiar enough with this GOI or this canon or whatever this is to know, but it's just sort of an obvious combination that I think it's almost guaranteed to be a certified banger. And then it also folds in some retconning of real life events, which we talked about in the last article a little bit, in allusion to this. It's done very tastefully. Some of the characters that are used here, like Jack McCall, are actually real characters that do have stories that this article finds a way to dovetail with by the end of it. And it does this very tastefully. Obviously, we've had a lot of these in the past. What's up? What's up, Fernlum? Good to see you, man. Thanks for joining. We a lot of the time we have historical retcons that are just doomed to fail because they have so much ambition going on for them. Retconning the Holocaust is a pretty hyperbolic example, but that actually does exist on the SCP Wiki. It used to, at least. Things like that. So when you retcon something like that, you get very tenuous very quickly. I remember one article in particular was SCP-4911, which was a DJ Cactus article before he deleted it after being harassed so much for it, despite the article actually having plus 200 something. Of course, these things pocket change for DJ Cactus, doesn't care about that. But so that basically tried the retcon thing, and just it was probably one of the worst things you could do that on. The only one worse probably being the Holocaust or something like that. So, this is just really tastefully done. This is somebody who knows exactly how much of that to mix in to where it's not ruining a drink. Just the right amount. It's kind of like salt. If you put too much salt in something, I don't care if it's well cooked. I don't care the quality of it. I don't care where you sourced it from. It's bad. It's bad. So just the right amount of that here. Really, really good. And it's kind of a dusty and sparse, story. Just kind of giving you that Western town, high noon gunfight sort of vibe. And it's really just as tense and just as enjoyable too. The whole thing really can be described as sort of a metaphorical and literary gunslinging scene, sort of expanded a bit. But it just has an excellent representation of this mantra that we see so popular to the SCP Wiki these days, which is, an anomaly for the narrative's sake. And this just does that very, very well, because the problem with that we see a lot of is that, really uncareful, really unskilled, really neglectful authors will take that as an excuse to just blaze through the description. Just like, what has been happening to the containment procedures for the last few years too, where that's just kind of like, okay, we don't need to use it. It's almost like taking a certain cut of, an ingredient and just throwing it away, as opposed to utilizing it for something that can actually help the dish. It's just thrown away. Oh, I don't want to deal with this. Just throw it out. When there's good meat on there, and a good cook will use all that meat, find a way to use it. Certainly someone who's respectful, of whatever it is that they're working with. So this one doesn't do that. The anomaly is 100% in service of the narrative, but it doesn't outsize the narrative with respect to the anomaly. Does that make sense? It always remains in control. The anomaly is always right there. It doesn't get kicked over way there. It doesn't get thrown off the table. It's always sort of in the center of the plate. But really the show is everything else. It's almost like rice, where you have this nice canvas and of course all the good stuff goes on or around the rice. But the rice is sort of the glue that holds it together. So this is just a really, really well constructed. There's a ton of just obviously superior craftsmanship going on in this article. So I was not surprised when I finally found out who it was. I like to wait till the end to do that, to be scientific as possible, as unbiased as possible. You don't want to have to give any full disclosures as to the review process. And it's Dr. Sumerian, who's obviously a veteran, obviously breathes containment fiction, and can write a hell of an article. So this is just a really, really charming article. So this is definitely a recommendation. And unless I change my mind in the next 2 hours, this may be the recommendation of the week. I think the rating is spot on. It's not obviously it's not a blockbuster hit. This is not for everyone. It doesn't really have the bombast of something like Admonition Hub or something like that. It's just tasteful. It's respectable. It's mature, is what it is. And so 63 is more attractive to me than triple digits for this article at this moment in time. It's just so very elegant, so very reserved, and I love that so much. So great job to UIU 6413, aka SCP 6413, and fantastic job to the author, Dr. Sumerian. All right, the next one is 6743. Let's take a peek at this. And while I sort of refamiliarize myself with this, let's get Brian to tell us what this is about. Go ahead.
Empty promise ring that breaks not only the hearts but the language of the person who wears it then takes it off.
Right.
It is neutralized because the anomaly was shattered in an incident.
Yeah, so we see it's neutralized. That's exactly right. So it's a standard size 11 iron ring featuring an empty setting at the center. Its design was consistent with a typical, that's actually a typo, with an typical, that should be a atypical promise ring. So it's never good when you have a typo in basically one of the only two sentences starting off your description, but whatever. Yeah, so this is, once again, not too terribly long of an article. Most of the length is in these spaced dialogues. So don't be too intimidated by the scroll bar, which really isn't that small. But yeah, this article actually was one of the ones that stuck out to me. I don't think it's stellar in its quality, but I think that just what went into the construction of this was really, really impressive. Really, really impressive. Because the author didn't have to do this. They set the bar for what is going to constitute success for this article incredibly high, incredibly high. They didn't need to do that. Nobody was holding them to that but themselves. And so for that, I really, really respect this author. I don't care about the rating of this. I think 13 is quite low, honestly, for how well maneuvered this idea is here. But yeah, so the author is very clearly writing to their own level of standards. They're not the kind of author who sees the lowest, the lowest necessary threshold for acceptance and decides to skate that. This is somebody who goes way, way above and beyond in order to put on the page what they think they want to. So let's go through this because I do recommend a read of this. Ultimately, I think this is a pretty good one. So the exposition here is a little, just if I could say a couple bad things about it to get it out of the way. The exposition is somewhat couch potato-esque. It relies on a lot of these notes, note in the middle syndrome, and you have note at the end syndrome as well, and that's almost literally with this CSS note stuff going on here. That it really explains what's going on almost in its entirety. So it's kind of got the note at the end syndrome. Anyway, the anomaly here, though, is interesting. So basically what happens is somebody who puts on the ring loses their ability to speak and write adjectives, verbs, and common nouns more than once. So as soon as you put this ring on for 72 hours, until the effect wears off. In other words, you can't repeat the same noun, you can't repeat the same verb, you can't repeat the same adjective. So this is sort of like a little logic puzzle that's already been constructed here, because obviously we're going to see somebody who is affected by this, and we're going to already, we know, be watching very carefully to make sure that the author doesn't repeat a noun, a verb, an adjective, and break their own rules, break their own logic. So that's what I mean when I say the author really set the bar very high for themselves. And so once you kind of get this anomaly and start to understand what it is, you see that it would be very difficult for somebody who relies upon speaking or writing, because suddenly they have a sparsity. You know, basically their words become non-fungible. You can't have two of the word window. You know, you can only use that once and then it's gone. So there's a certain scarcity and sparsity to the language that occurs here. So obviously somebody who relies upon speaking or writing just in the happenings about of their daily life or their profession, this is going to be a really, really bad anomaly for somebody to get in touch with. And so that sort of foreshadows what's going to happen here. The characterization, I think, speaking of which, gets really, really interesting when the individual who is responsible for reclassifying the anomaly as relatively a mundane anomalous item and not actually an SCP is really the individual who ends up taking center stage here. So there's a few ironies about this. The Dr. Patrick Lyons, as you see here, is the one who suggested, I guess, that this SCP be reclassified into an anomalous object due to its relatively low risk compared to other anomalies. And so this is interesting because what happens is that because it's just a mundane anomalous object as opposed to an SCP, there's not really a lot of sufficient research or documentation about this thing. And it just so happens that Dr. Lyons, I don't want to give away the article here, but it just so happens that he plays a central role in why this anomaly is the way it is, almost as if he was meant to have contact with this anomaly. So what really brought him in touch with the anomaly was the culmination of a story that you'll have to read that was working behind the scenes the whole time. So it's a really interesting article. I think that it really suffers around the time of the interviews. I think basically the format of the interview happens just because the author got tired of putting things in these email formats. I mean, because basically everything that they do in the interview certainly could have been done in the emails as well. There's really nothing necessitating the meeting physically, except for just a change of pace for the read. And so that kind of sticks out as a little odd. There wasn't really a good justification given for why it is that they wanted to meet in person. But like I said, it's a very difficult article to write. If you go through and look at all of this character's speech, you see this horrifying progression of basically this individual having a harder and harder time, and you sort of see this individual's ability to connect with other people, to speak, just wither, because every time he opens his mouth, he's using words that he can't ever use again, given that his interaction with this anomaly is a little different from the others, and that it doesn't seem to be going away. So this is just a really isolating effect. It's a really, really vivid, a very creative idea, and I think the author does a really good job. So let's see who it is, just to give him credit. Fish Ate Me. Thank God that's the name of the author, not the name of the article. Because we're tired of fish. We're tired of fish here. So anyway, this isn't too long. I do recommend it. Who was it? Stormbreath said that no one's found a way to really make notes convincing in CSS, and unfortunately I think that's still true. I think the quality of this is well beyond its rating. So, but I think if the author is going for ratings, they did it in a bad way, because this is an article that shouldn't care about ratings. It's one that tries to meet its own internal logic. I think it does a decent job of it. I do remember seeing a few words that are repeated, but I mean, they're just mild words. It's very hard to do. So 6743. This one is called, I really should be telling you the titles of these as I go. Let's see. I think I wrote it down. 6473 is called Interchangeable Language Band by Fish Ate Me. The UIU one before was I Bet You Dread to Spend Another Lonely Night with Me by Dr. Sumerian. The first one was, not surprisingly and unimpressively, Into the Cataverse by Neat Picky. Okay, so that is 6743. Definitely a recommendation. Definitely a recommendation. That person is working overtime. Seemed to be a workaholic of sorts. So the next one, 6281. 6281. Let's find this one. 6281. Cool. 6281. Oh, yeah. Okay. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about this while I take a nice sip of water and try to remember this article. What is it?
An obsidian black monolith access ports to all known means of electrical access, including many unknown. It sits in a cave that should be man-made, but isn't. Can connect to Bluetooth, and when connected to, features a search bar to a wiki. Pages can be edited. It is omniscient, except for self-knowledge. Okay, so that's a really interesting setup here. So, yeah, so we have this monolith that stands pretty tall. It's got any kind of electronic plug-in device that you can imagine. USB, typical AC/DC, all kind of stuff that we don't even know what it is. Stuff that hasn't been invented yet. All those exist on this one pole, this one like electronic pole. And so it's discovered in this cave that's just like, I imagine it sort of to be like perfectly smooth, perfectly circular. The dimensions is a perfect sphere, and yet the archaeological evidence suggests that it's natural completely. So you got a couple of strange things going on here, sort of a double-tiered anomaly that sort of builds up, a very engaging read here. So, we see a lot of obsidian black monoliths on the SCP Wiki. There's a ton of those. And so it's really hard to make one sort of interesting just immediately. But I think this does a good job of it. It mixes sort of this really old, sort of atavistic vibe of like this old structure, this old monolith that was probably carved by some prehistoric civilization, and it meshes that, sort of almost juxtaposes that really with an electronic array that not only is up to date but is well beyond our up to date. So it's a lot of things going on here at once. There's a very dark, abstract, sort of atmospheric, but grounded. That was a pun. Electrical grounded. In these, like I said, familiar concepts. Things that we interact with every day. Plugging something in, connecting to Bluetooth. Bluetooth is on here. Basically, when you plug something up to this obelisk, this little screen pops up right here that you see on the screen here. So it's a welcome screen. There's a text box. Basically, it's a search bar. It works a lot better than Wikidots, so that's nice. But once again, that's one more of these more familiar things that we have in today's technology that's sort of just very oddly set in what is connotated as a very, very old technology, which is, stone carving or something like that. So it's highly conceptual, highly conceptual, and gets sort of causally conceptual when you see that the information that you edit into these pages. So let me back up and explain that. So basically, you type in something in the search box, and it's basically a wiki. It's basically like Wikipedia, where anything you type in, it's going to give you a series of data points and information, on whatever it is that you say. Not only everything that's happened up until that point, but also for the future as well. So it's predictive, additionally. So it's got this prophetic sort of ambiance to it, which is a little weird too. It's kind of ominous, and just adds another dimension of this thing is not going to fit into any sort of box, except for the safe box, of course. Yeah, basically you pull it up, it's a wiki page, and it even has a little edit button on it. So if you click that, we're getting a little meta here. We're now casting familiar elements to this specific website. You can click edit, you can modify the page, and when you do, whatever information you put in
becomes true, and it becomes true for all time. So we've seen this in other things. We've seen this, let's say, in a pataphysical form with SCP integer, where whatever you describe something as, it gets abstracted into some arbitrary threshold of abstraction, and then it's that way forever. That's how you get some stupid names that show up on the SCP Wiki, like placeholder McDoctorate. By the way, we've been doing live streams of a podcast on the SC podcast. That's a secure containment podcast with Dr. McDoctorate, placeholder PhD, MD, and that's been happening this week at 7:30 Central. We'll continue that next week on Monday and try to finish that up. But if you're interested in pataphysics and you want to kind of give placeholder your ear to see him defend his side of things, I do recommend you listen to that with me. It's been pretty interesting so far. We're about halfway through. But anyways, the same thing is happening here. Just like an abstraction in SCP integer by placeholder McDoctorate, something very similar happens in SCP 4000, where as soon as you say something, it basically makes something else happen. It affects this permanent change. In SCP 4000, of course, it's proper names and descriptions. But so in this, when you edit it, it's definitive, and it is predictive, and it's self-referential sort of thing. So because it has this sort of predictive, future comes true sort of mechanism going on, it sort of gives me strong vibes from both Jonathan Ball's proposal, which is a sheaf of papers, which is a great 001, and also Kate McTierris's proposal, which is another 001, where basically you can edit a slot in a database, and whatever you put in there becomes true. And of course, the character of Kate McTierris's 001 does that to obtain godhood. So yeah, it does those same things. It juggles some very difficult concepts, like the blending of time and causality, but it does so very carefully. And what I mean by that is it avoids trying to work through or introducing or creating or solving or unpretzeling things like time travel logic or bootstrap paradoxes. It really doesn't deal with that. It keeps it very simple because it's a very complicated ingredient to try to play along with. Even some of the best conceptual authors in the SCP Wiki's history, and I'm thinking specifically of Malice Afterthought, who is incredibly abstract, an incredibly gifted abstract thinker. Even that individual had a very difficult time trying to find ways to thread things like bootstrap paradoxes and time travel, logic or illogic. So yeah, you don't touch that stuff unless you're highly specialized and an expert in it. And so I think the author makes a very smart move by sort of giving us just the flavor of it, not really the depths of it. So good job with that. There's a few issues that I noticed. So the word amnestics is both found capitalized and not capitalized, like in quick succession from one another. See, like right here it's lowercase, right here it's uppercase. Once again, not a big deal, but just lets us know that the author didn't proofread this as much as they probably should. And then there was a weird thing to me about this is that the classification at the top is level 6. So traditionally there's 5 levels of security, informational security at the SCP Wiki, with the 5, of course, being the O5. And so what level 6 is, personally, I'm not sure. We could probably venture a guess and be pretty safe, probably get it pretty close. But I don't really understand what it is. And to really add to that confusion, we have redactions in this level of security. So if 5 is the highest, and of course we're now positing, we're trying to turn that up to 11 by going to level 6 here, we still have redactions in this, and you can see them here. So they've redacted the location of this object, and I don't think really you could get to any higher level than 6. I'm not really sure why the redactions exist. It doesn't make a lot of sense. A note says that unmodified records are in the possession of O5 council members, but that, once again, the document is supposed to be for them only anyway, so why would you need, here it is, why would you need unmodified, unredacted records in personal possession of the O5s when this is only supposed to be, even in its digital form, for O5s? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It seems like it lost itself trying to try a little too hard with that. And then the second place where this sort of rubs people the wrong way, I think, and it's obvious from the rating, which is +6, which I think, by the way, is incredibly too low for this article. It's really well written, and once again, the concept is unique on its face. There's not a lot of love for anomalies that are just interesting. You have to be interesting and have a great story, and you can't just be interesting. If you're a little stronger on the interest factor of the anomaly and not as strong on the narrative that ensues or is created from it, it's really counted against you, more so than if you had, it's weighed. The narrative side of things is weighed more heavily. So basically, if you do a good job in the description of the anomaly, it doesn't really count for much. It doesn't get you as many places. All right, so Dr. Fern says, oddly, I seem to be on a bad delay. Well, I hate to tell you, but I have lowered the resolution of this stream to the lowest possible. It's 360. So I've had a lot of troubles with this freezing and sort of skipping frames. So I finally got it to work, and I can't do anything more on my end to make that a little better. I would encourage you to check and see what's going on, but I appreciate you letting me know, and keep letting me know if it doesn't get any better, if you tweak things, and I'll look into it. But I can't worry about it too much right now because I got to get through this. The show must go on, as the adage says. And so anyway, back to what I was saying. The other thing about this that I think probably jars people to the point where it's only at +6. It's really tenuous right now. It's not in critical condition, but it's in intensive care for sure, on watch. Is that the secondary class that's listed here is Florgalana, and you see that. I don't think that's been used before. If it has, I'm not aware of it. And if we look at the footnote, it says, the item aids the Foundation in partially containing itself and or other anomalies, but cannot be fully contained for logistical and or ethical reasons. So, yeah, back in the day, if you didn't have just a fantastic justification for introducing a new object class or an alternate object class or an esoteric one, or in this case, a secondary one, you were going to get just absolutely dragged over the coals for it. I think, when DJ Cactus did his SCP-4444, which was his 4K entry contest, that one even caused some people to get their underwear sort of ruffled. That was a Ticonderoga, which has something to do with Two Rivers, but is also, as it happens, the name of a classical pencil company that makes those old pencils that you sharpen. And something tells me that that's where he got the name. But just my headcanon, my pataphysical headcanon. But anyway, so the problem with this, in my opinion, the secondary object class being Florgalana, which is a nice phrase. It's sort of florid, which it's pretty. It's a pretty phrase, but it's really a useless label the more you think about it. So basically, if you look at the first part of this footnote 1, item aids the Foundation in partially containing itself and or other anomalies. That's basically Thaumiel. It's basically utility. And the last phrase, which says, but cannot be fully contained for logistical and or ethical reasons, that kind of reminds me of Archon. So it's sort of this like footnote, this like pseudo, this sort of pigeonholed class that tries to be sort of the synergy of two things, but ends up failing to be either one really well. So it's kind of like Swiss Army knife syndrome, where you have a Swiss Army knife and it has like 10 things on it, and that's way cool. And there's a moment where that can be helpful, obviously, but the Swiss Army knife is worse at doing any given function than a totally dedicated version of that thing on the Swiss Army knife. Does that make sense? So, for example, you got a screwdriver on your Swiss Army knife, and it's okay, it can get a job done, but it's not a great screwdriver. You don't really have that long torque purchase on that handle, and you have this like little dinky little thing to spin. So, same thing with like scissors. I mean, things that limit themselves to just being that one thing really well, obviously, are going to do that one job really well. So I think this kind of suffers from that. Suffers from sort of a Swiss Army knife. Suffers from a Swiss Army knife thing going on here, to where it doesn't really do either very well at all. It doesn't do the Thaumiel well. It doesn't do the Archon well. And you're sort of just like, okay, so why did we go on this crazy ride? Like, you know, you got two forward slashes between safe and Fergalana. Like, I mean, come on, man. Like, I think at some point, I think at this point, most readers are gonna find that to be too transgressive to overcome. You know, which probably is insulting it a little too much. It's probably a little overbaked, but you know, at the same time, you can't blame them. I mean, you know, you gotta hit it. You know, it's like shooting a bear. You know, if you're gonna shoot, you gotta hit it. And if you don't hit it, you're gonna get fucked up. So I kind of think that was the risk that was played here, and I don't think it hit. I think it was a bad shot. So that doesn't sink the article for me, but it certainly gets it off to the wrong start. I'll say that. So if you're going to have a two-tiered system of object classification and you try to blend the secondary one, why don't you just make it Thaumiel and Archon? You know, why do you make it safe and then a fancy schmancy, you know, combo of the two? Just, you know, just make it. You've already breached the ground of having two, so just make it Thaumiel and Archon. I don't know. Anyway, so if we scroll down, though, we get to the testing. And the testing is where this article gets just really impressively thoughtful, to the point where I forget about all this up here. It doesn't matter to me anymore. There's a line that says, testing on altering information residing in the past was approved on January 27th, 2022, but no test was ever conducted. Testing was reapproved on a month later, and then again a few days later. In both instances, no recorded test was ever conducted, despite records noting the beginning of testing. So this is where this article experiences like a plus 100 in IQ points. Right there in those sentences. I'll give you a hint. It's not that the testing never happened, because this is testing that's going to reside in the past. So I hope you see what's happening. It's very, very clever. Very well communicated, very subtly, very understated in about 3 sentences there, to the point where I'm pretty sure a lot of the people who, you know, take this to be too transgressive either haven't gotten to this point, or this is probably going to go over the heads of most people. Let's just tell it like it is. But I thought this was remarkably intelligent. So great job there. And then the author does go on to sculpt an engaging narrative from this, like I said, already interesting enough anomaly around a future date that the anomaly reports indirectly as the end of time. So it doesn't have any information after a certain point. So you see this right here, error, time does not exist, and the date is June 7th, 2177. And so that's really the engine of this article. So once you get you get to like this deadline, it's almost like a Y2K sort of setup. I think even a footnote mentions something like Y2K in here. But that's really going to be a useful mechanic for an article, because if you can introduce some sort of what they call a ticking time bomb, if you can introduce some sort of time scarcity, that increases the pressure, it increases the stake, it increases the temperature, and it really helps pull the reader through the rest of the article, because really it's a motivating factor, sort of like lighting a fire under somebody. So this is that for this article, and it's a very interesting one because it's set in the future, a pretty good ways away, because you know they're testing it in 2022 present day, and this is over 100 years later. So it's far enough away to not be like just outright terrified by it, but it's almost worse. It's almost like sitting in the waiting room and I'd rather get this thing over with. So anyway, that kind of is an interesting little moment that really is threaded throughout the entire article, and actually really is where the climax of the article really touches when it finally comes up. So I'd say the clinical tone here is excellent. I think it's above average. Once again, that's not something not totally well appreciated, I think. I was trying to find... do I need to open a collapsible? I do. That's why I can't find it. There's a lot of collapsibles in this. This is a rather long article, by the way. But I do think it's worth a read. This is a really great line just for an example of good clinical tone. Question, what is the next event that occurred after the server activation? The answer from this omniscient obelisk is fusion ignition of the astral body designated sun. It's just a mouthful of a concept in just a few words. Just a really, really good job here. And then another example, the black casing comprising SCP has proved durable beyond expected projections. You got to appreciate this, because, I mean, how many permutations of this same exact idea have we had on the SCP Wiki? It's thousands. And it's just nice to see somebody rearrange this, find a way in the Rubik's Cube to create a pattern that's never been seen before, a permutation like this. So this is just good craftsmanship. It's good compositional craftsmanship just in the lines themselves. Microscopic level, past the narrative where all that stuff kind of gets factored out in the scale. This is really, really good attention to detail here. I think the testing logs are used very effectively. Those are up here, where they basically ask it questions. It's sort of like a glorified 8-ball, just shaped differently, and the face is electronic, and so are the answers. So it's the good questions are asked here. So this is not an instance where you're left scratching your head as to why they didn't ask this certain question. All the questions are really well thought out, which is always a pleasure to see. I hate it when the Foundation are idiots. It casts the O5 Council, but in a rarity, speaking of which, it actually justifies their attention and concern. So one of the common pitfalls we get in the SCP is just you basically throw in an O5 Council note or an O5 Council transcript meeting, kind of in the same way you might throw gold into a pastry, or truffle onto a pasta, or butter onto anything. I mean, it's just like this hack where you introduce the O5 and the reader, like someone in universe, is supposed to automatically about face, tension, tin hut kind of thing, and rarely is it actually justified. Like, what the hell are the O5 Council doing, wasting their time looking at a fish, or some milk, or a fish drinking milk or something like that inside the belly of a cat. I don't know. But actually, this one obviously is very, very well justified because we're talking about what could be the end of the world. There's this ominous future date. And of course, the sort of ethical things that are discussed in this O5 command cast the O5 as highly philosophical and intelligent. You have people sort of volleying arguments, and each side of the argument is really believable. It's really strong-manned. To the point where neither of these is like outright much weaker than the other, which is once again typically the case you see with people, O5, trying to be smart. But this actually is smart, so that's nice. That's something that we see a lot of in the opposite direction of the SCP Wiki. Fern, throwing them in like a D class into the murder hole. Yeah. Yeah, the O5 are cheap. They're cheap. I mean, they're just they're a hack. They're a compositional hack. You can throw them at any time, and suddenly your article is super, super important. It's like the old DJ Cactus 05 header that tells us that this is obviously already a classified document, because it's on the SCP Foundation and it's level 5. But it's so secret and classified that it needs its own header just to remind you that the 05 are better than you. So, yeah, it's a little like D-Class. I mean, there's an infinite supply of it, and the more you use them, the cheaper they get, That's what we call inflation, where the more of it, the less it means. So, this is it's used really well. It's very refreshing to see the intelligence awarded to the O5 members. It's satisfying, and it's really sinister. It's not just all like brute logic here. It's actually, you get to see a little bit of nefarious calculations going on here from the O5, so that's nice. I think the hide of the collapsible here is a nice touch. So if we go back, let's do this. So O5 authorization request required for decryption. The hide. What I mean by the hide is that when you type out, let's do this. When you type out a collapsible in the wiki dot, you do collapsible. Thanks. I'm actually doing this for the 100th time. You have the optional parameter to show which blah blah, you know, and then you have the parameter option to hide, and you type something in there. And so what that does is that when you actually click it, it tells the code what to say here, and then when you click it, that's the hide. So what you would click to minimize, to recollapse the collapsible. And so this is an interesting hide. I've never seen this hide before. It sounds like I'm talking dirty, but I'm not. Hide, as in this. Not hide, as in ass. But this is a nice hide. It's a nice ass hide. And I haven't seen it before. And so it says re-encrypt. So I just like that. That's just, once again, it's like trying to find new ways to do small things. And it's just a little detail that I don't know if people catch, but I really appreciate it. I always look for those things. So once again, just really detailed craftsmanship. This is like the Beretta of articles. Just pays attention to itself to make sure it has quality. So that's nice. And so that's really the vibe of the whole article, I would say. Every detail is found and it's squeezed for all it's worth. It's really mulled over and it's just very well machined, the whole article. And by the end of it, without ruining the ending, all the upheld composure of the in-universe personnel dealing with this potentially catastrophic anomaly sort of melts into very human emotions, fear, terror. You can kind of see it show up here. We've got sort of the bolding of the text to sort of signify that. I do appreciate that it's not all capsed. What's up? Oh, thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. So I just think it's an excellent blend of science fiction, the anomalous, time play, stern thinking, and it's really pataphysics in a way. It's pataphysics really, which I've said before and I'll say many, many other times. It's really pataphysics done the only way that pataphysics can work well, which is understated, which is not mentioned by name, which is sort of folded in to the other content of the article, leaving the author to sort of be like, there's some very interesting meta play going on here without it being a dominant sort of flavor. Once again, I would reference Jonathan Ball. I would reference Kate McTieris' 001s. Those are pataphysical. I mean, Kate McTieris' 001 is incredibly pataphysical, actually. But you never would know that. It never flaunts that. It never advertises that. It's almost like by the time you flaunt it and advertise it, it becomes contaminated as something potentially impressive. So this does sort of pull a pataphysical vibe off without saying so, which I always think is, once again, the only way you can execute this effectively. So good job on the author there. And I would say that if it weren't for the things that hold this article back, really it's the ending. I think that this could be, if Jonathan Ball and Kate McTieris hadn't already done this, I think it could be a 001. Just, I mean, in the scope of it, and in its ambition and its scale. I think it certainly has the ingredients to potentially be something like a 001. However, it's really the ending of this that doesn't do well. The ending of this, it really fumbles in the very, very last play of the game, yeah, fully agreed. Furlan said pataphysics is growing on me. I'll tell you this. I am in the process of reading. I'm really, really bad with numbers, but it's one of placeholder McDoctorates because once again, I'm sort of on a placeholder McDoctorate sort of tear right now. We're looking at once again his podcast with SC podcast, this secure containment podcast with the Forlorn Foundry gentleman. That was done about this time last year, so I'm sort of trying to give him the benefit of the doubt because I think pataphysics is sort of like smoke and mirrors. Unless you're really, really good at it, it's gonna come off as a little gimmicky. It doesn't really stand toe to toe with other styles or schools of writing on the wiki. It can't really stand toe to toe with them and just beat something down with sheer compositional talent. It sort of has to maneuver itself and sort of, create wrinkles to take advantage of, I think, in order to make the statements that it tries to make. But having said that, with something interesting about placeholder McDoctorate, and I'm reading his article that I can't remember the number of, but it's one of the first ones in the Admonition Hub, the really, really big one that has the accessibility option, and it's got Steph Lynch's incredible art on there with the schematics. I'm reading that one, and it is very interesting to see what Placeholder is doing. Placeholder is taking the phrase pataphysics literally. He is taking the pataphysics part of it and trying his damnedest to construct a internal logic that applies the closest you can get to a physics to pataphysics. And so, there's something really respectable about that. And there are some really, really engaging concepts going on in there. Like, for example, the article that I'm reading, it really takes particle physics and meshes it with pataphysics. And it's just really interesting to see what sort of ontological anchor is informing these pataphysical particles. In this case of the article, for example, it's the particles are sort of differentiated by how much intent, how much protagonistic intent, I think would be the way that he would put it, goes into each of those particles. So you have sort of this zero level particle where it's just a character sitting there, and then the next particle up is the character realizing that it's, in an environment. I guess it sort of represents sentience. And then the next particle up perhaps is sapience, and the next particle up is like, going on the hero's journey where you're trying to enact some change in the environment. So I think that there are some very interesting things that are going on in the pataphysics sort of school, the pataphysics sort of discipline. Now, that's me massaging it. That's me flattering it, because ultimately I think that it's pseudo-intelligence. Ultimately, I think it doesn't really achieve the sort of grander philosophical gestures that it tries to make. A lot of it is sort of solipsistic, and it's a lot of pontificating that doesn't really amount to what I would call real philosophy, or, well, I want to say that. I'm not trying to insult the kid. He's a really, really smart kid. I just think it's sort of a stoner's intelligence is all. I think it doesn't really rise to the level of actual thought. I think it's flashy. I think it's the flashy car that doesn't really have a good engine. And as nice as that looks, I'd rather have the car that is really, really good, really, really reliable, even if it doesn't look that great. That's the kind of guy I am. So, I think there's an age gap between me and Placeholder McDoctorate that probably informs that somewhat. But yeah, I mean, for his demographic in the audience, I'll tell you the most impressive thing about Placeholder, and then we'll move on. We can continue to talk about all this on Monday night if you want to join at 7:30 CST as we continue that interview. But I think the most impressive thing about Placeholder McDoctorate, regardless of what you think about him, is that he's found a way to take what is just inevitably, impossibly esoteric, and made it pretty commercially successful. That's really, really difficult to do. I was trying to write, let me say it that way. I was trying to write about the things Placeholder is writing about in 2018, 2019 on the wiki, and I was doing a much worse job at it than he is currently doing, and it completely failed. And so seeing someone do that successfully is really, really impressive. So anyway, all that to say, the best pataphysics is the most understated pataphysics. The best pataphysics is when you aren't explicitly, it's not explicitly shoved in your face that this is pataphysics. Get your philosopher's cap on now. Like that's not real conversation, man. Like no one actually talks that way. like give me a real conversation. Like I'll say it again, and then I'll stop it, because this isn't a rant. This is a cul-de-sac. I know exactly where I'm going to get back in here, but I did a bachelor's of arts in philosophy from a reputable school, and what I gained from it was the permission to not be impressed by philosophy anymore, because basically it is, there's very little substance when you really cut into it. There's very little intellectual sustenance to most philosophy out there, and it's said best in a quote by one of my favorite authors, and that quote is that there are more truths in the 24 hours of a person's life than there are in all of the philosophy books combined. And it's 100% true. I mean, there's something to be said for going out there and touching grass, and pataphysics is the farthest thing from touching grass. Farthest thing. So anyway, this article does do pataphysics. You wouldn't know it by looking at it. It doesn't give you a nice CSS announcing it sort of in a trumpet-like fashion, as if royalty, but it does dip into pataphysics, and I think it does it very, very well. Maybe the author could have advertised that a little more and gotten a few more upvotes, but I certainly respect the understated subtlety of this. But like I said, really it's the ending of this. Once you get to the ending, I won't ruin it, obviously. This edit button doesn't work as a pataphysical element. First of all, on the master race, which is the PC or desktop race, you can't really read this. And this sort of pop-up is alluded to earlier on in the article, and it's just sort of anticlimactic. It's sort of like an appendage that's just kind of hanging there, and it's not flattering. And it would look much better without it. It's sort of like something that was attempted to be pasted on, and it just looks like an imperfection. It doesn't look good. And then the very end is, how do I talk about the end here? So it kind of pretzels in on itself. There's a comment here that I think is left that's really, really good. Let me find it real quick. Lack of an ending. Yeah, so here it is. Lord, I'm sure these Roman numerals are easier said. I just don't have the time or the attention span to figure it out. So I'm just going to say Lord X. Lord X, who I'm noticing is a pretty good critter when it comes to articles that are posted. We'll see him again. Says, I'd say the idea of this piece has potential and is about 70% of the way to good execution, but one of the characters is essentially a non-character in terms of growth or change, and this is the part I'm trying to get to here. The lack of an ending was frankly unsatisfying. If there was more of a definitive conclusion implied, I personally didn't pick up on it. And so this is, I think, exactly what happens. Because there's such progression and development in the article all the way throughout, there's such high stakes going on here that if you're going to do that as a risk-reward, decision as an author, the payoff has to punch at the same level. Has got to. You can't slowly build up the notes on the scale and then get to the peak note on the scale, the octave up on the tonal, and then shit all over that note. It's not, you shouldn't have done that to begin with. Then, if you can't hit that, if your vocal range can't hit that last note, don't ascend like that. That's what's happening here. It just doesn't rise to the occasion, the end. So that explains, I think, the low vote count, despite otherwise being a really well-written and in some ways incredible article. But I agree with Lord X. I'm not shy or self-conscious about saying when I don't understand something at all. It's just maybe it's over my head. I kind of get the feeling that it is. Just given the evidence of the rest of the article's thought content and strength, but by the end of it, I don't get it. Maybe I'm too dumb, but it just totally went over my head, and I have no clue what it means. So hopefully it stays in the site, and hopefully this is one of the ones that can be appreciated with a little bit of time. Maybe we'll come back to it, and it will have aged a little better along with our minds, and we can understand it a little better. But I think it really just trips. It just trips on the very last step. So that's a bummer. It's a bummer of a place to trip. But I do recommend the read just because it's so well written, and there are moments in this that just knock it out of the park. It loses the game, I think, at the end, but it does a really, really good job. Very exciting. Very exciting anomaly. Okay, so that's 6281. Let's give some props to the author here now that we have made the assessment. And thank God, once again, thank you so much, author, for not automatically contaminating the review process by putting your name up top instantly. This is Joe Dagon, an author that I'm not familiar with. We got the wiki.wink, so probably relatively new, but I would hope to see more from Joe Dagon. If this is one of his first or their first attempts, that's very, very promising, and I think the individual capability-wise is far above what the rating would indicate. So I hope the author is not reading too much into that rating. All right, so let's move on. We are at 6337, and already we can see this article has 37 comments. You know, and that doesn't tell you that it's great. Sometimes it does. But then again, SCP-001J, the Great Seal, was released in the last couple of weeks, and we saw something similar there. So, although I think that one's rounding about 100 upvotes, so good on that. But yeah, sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Okay, I'm on a placeholder binge too. Yeah. So this one already is at 102. It's less than a week old. 6337. Automatically, right out of the gate, we are greeted with what could be a turn off, but it isn't. This guy, he's so punchable that you just want to read the rest of the article. You want to know how it is that he's just so punchable. So let's drop on first. Take a second. I'm gonna get a sip of this water, and let's let Brian tell us what he synopsized this article as.
A corpse in the Site 8 break room. It is contained by covering it with a tarp. No captioned image is odd as hell, but also somehow acceptable.
Yeah, so I don't know if you caught that, but this image doesn't have a caption. There's nothing in the caption box, so it's just a very strange way to start the article. And would you believe me if I told you that this is the least strange part of this article? It really just continuously outstranges itself over and over again. And yeah, I think, God, what can you say about this article? Holy shit, this article is so fucked up. It really is. It's just so fucking weird. That's really the only word for this article. So let's kind of walk through this together, and I'll try to point out just how fucked up this is, how weird this is. It's like a new dimension of weird. It's like a color that no one has seen before. That's what this article is like. It's just so confusing and alluring at the same time. You cannot look away from it. So this immediately takes a what the fuck nosedive with the second line of the description. Is technically the third sentence. SCP-6337 is a corpse because it doesn't move or speak. Like, what the fuck kind of logic is this operating by? Like, instantly. What? What? So the description goes on to detail the decomposition of this corpse of Site Director Kieran Bachman, and that's one of the reasons we might think he's punchable, is because it turns out he's got a name to match that punchable face of Kieran. But it kind of becomes Neo-Law Foundation, and if you know anything about me, you know that that's like a really bad word. That's like one of the lowest things you could be called, in my opinion, on the SCP Wiki. It's so antithetical to what the SCP Wiki is. It's a dishonorable discharge. You know, if you're Neo-Law Foundation, you've utterly failed. It's the worst of the worst. It's the dregs. It's the sediment at the bottom of the shit tank. And so it kind of flirts with that here. Luckily, it's weird enough to not, I think, be totally defined by the moments that it does dip into Neo-Law Foundation. I think it surfaces again. So basically, in this section, we see things like the anomaly having its head buried in a chocolate cake, and the researcher, who apparently is intelligent, you know, we would assume is intelligent, interprets this anomaly's face in a chocolate cake as the individual trying to sleep. So, I mean, once again, this could be Neo-Law Foundation, but it isn't, because as you read the rest of the article, you just realize that it's not so much trying to be funny as it is trying to be surreal. It's sort of like looking at a Dali painting where the proportions aren't, and the figures and the shapes of, let's say, a clock are not distorted to be comical in the way that you might see a clock animated on a Looney Tunes, but it's done so as a stylistic statement. And so it doesn't really ride too heavily on this sort of like Neo-Law Foundation-esque antics going on here. And this person is a senior researcher too. So, I mean, you're left asking, you know, why this person can't figure out that the person is not trying to take a nap in the chocolate cake. But anyway, so we go on to addenda, the second one, and we have this interesting scene of small talk, but it's small talk that's done really, really well. And then at some point in here, the anomaly lifts its head. we were already told it's a corpse. It's sort of like face down in some chocolate cake. Apparently it's dead, and then it lifts its head. It sort of gives this sort of like shaggy dreadlocks, kind of like background radiation logic, where like something else is going on here, and it's not ever stated, but it seems to feel like it has some internal logic to it. That's kind of the vibe you get from here. So it works really, really well. And then what else happens in this article? So a committee of personnel then propose what to do with the body and ultimately decide on encasing it in cement, which kills the anomaly, I guess, if it was alive. So we end with this also strange image that doesn't have a caption. And then maybe the weirdest part about the article is that there's an actual author's note that is sitting in the actual, in-universe article, which to me is almost an instant downvote. And I'll tell you why it wasn't in this case. I mean, this is literally the author just like, it's just a huge middle finger to the believability. It's just a huge middle finger to the format, but it works. That's the weird part about it. Like you'll never find anybody who gets more triggered by an author's note in the document. Like that's me. Like I will get more mad than anybody over something like that. And yet I read this and I was like, hell yeah. I have no idea why. I can't tell you why. I wish I could tell you. I just can't. It's literally an author's note at the end in a collapsible that explains the out-of-universe inspiration and justification for the story. It's a funny, weird, kind of try-hard article that's so unsure of itself, but it doesn't come off as being unsure. It comes off as just not giving a fuck. And this article, that's, I think, what the success of it. It's got so much I don't give a fuck charisma about it. Something that I'm usually pissed off by. But it does it just so like it's so charming, I suppose. In that it doesn't give any fucks. It has its own charisma, about it. It has its own like reinvention of what charisma is. How you can. It's a creative way to show how few fucks you can give. That's what this article is. So ultimately, once again, I have no problem admitting this. I have no fucking clue what's going on here. I don't think anybody else does. I think including the author. I don't think the author understands. Even this author's note doesn't really go very far in explaining what the actual anomaly is doing there, or like what the story is doing here. And so this is sort of something that we're seeing sort of emerge that I'm quite excited about, quite honestly, because I am a surrealist. I fucking love surrealism. If you've never read the autobiographical diary of Salvador Dali, who is like Mr. Surrealism. Salvador Dali, you know him. He's this dude. First of all, look at his fucking Wikipedia picture. Look at his mustache. That was just how he rolled. Salvador Dali was a guy who woke up every morning orgasmic at the idea that he was Salvador Dali. And it wasn't like narcissistic. I guess it was, but it was less narcissistic than it was just thankful, just exuberant, for life. I don't know if that comes across in his paintings, which you are familiar with his paintings. Here's an incredibly famous one. I hope you can see this well on the screen, but just with the mosquito-legged elephants. And of course, there's another one that's very famous with clocks that I don't see showing up here. Right here it is. Melting clocks. This is very famous. Anyway, you know this guy. Mr. Surrealist. He is Mr. Surrealist in the art world. And so we're sort of starting to see a new school of stylistic development come about on the SCP Wiki. And I think, honestly, it probably is a derivative of Neo-Law Foundation. And so I'm actually kind of excited about that because I hate Neo-Law Foundation. It's people who are, it's sort of like the mumble rap of, or the SoundCloud rap. Not that SoundCloud didn't have good people come out of it. Chance, I think, Danny Brown, I think, came out of SoundCloud, but there are good people to come out of SoundCloud, but most of them, you had this sort of connotation of them being just absolute shitheads who have no fucking clue what they're doing. They're just high out of their complete sanity, and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Out of Neo-Law Foundation is coming this sort of surrealistic article, this sort of surrealistic push on the SCP Wiki. And I think there's been several instances of it. I think this is by far the best one. This is, let me put it this way. The SCP Foundation classically, traditionally, historically, and culturally, most importantly, is an exercise in realism, right? It has always tried its hardest to asymptotically approach being believable. That's really why it's different from something like fan fiction, which doesn't have that concern. It knows that it's fan fiction, and so it doesn't try. There's no rules really besides those that are just common to generalized writing that it has to try to follow. And of course, those rules, those boundaries, those barriers allow for elements to be played with. For example, if you have a fence where you didn't have one before, you can see it as something that you can't get past now, or you can use it as a canvas for shadow art, kind of like what's behind me right now. Right, so there's always a fun other side of the coin, glass half full interpretation of anything that could be defined as a boundary. And this is what makes things like Min Min's Radiohead INO article so good. It's what makes pataphysics really good when it's understated. Is because you're not so much, violently ripping through the holes that are created by the restrictions of the genre, but you're taking a magnifying glass to them. You're doing things with them that most people might miss, and you're doing it in a very talented way. Anybody can draw a shitty clock. Anybody can draw a clock that is out of proportion, that doesn't look good, that is not realistic. But only Salvador Dali can draw a clock that's melting, that doesn't really look like a clock, and it'd be like, wow, that's amazing. So it's not necessarily the core elements of Neo-Law Foundation that are god awful. 99% of it is. It's who is wielding those elements. Let me say it this way. I'll say it this way. This is, I think, something that the SCP Wiki does not understand very well, is that you can have the same idea show up again and again and again, and it just be masterful because of virtue of who's doing it. So the example that I give is, you can take one piece of classical music and have, 10 people play it, but only when that one person plays it, the way that they want to play it, is it amazing? When Glenn Gould plays that Bach piece that you've heard 1,000,000 times, it's somehow amazing when he plays it. And that's the sign of a master. It's not necessarily that he's played a piece that no one's played before. You get me? It's not necessarily that he's done something that no one's ever done, and that he's composed this crazy atonal piece that throws all, rules of composition out the window. It's that for some reason, when you give him a piece that hundreds of millions of other people have played, it's like amazing. Okay, that's what a master is. That's what a master of a craft is. Not some person who can create a new fucking school of composition. Okay, not necessarily. And so that's what this guy is doing. He's taken all the elements of Neo-Law Foundation that typically are just done to the point of absolute drivel, and somehow has done it incredibly well. So. That was a bit of a rant, but it's the best I can do to put this into, what works in this. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. So I think all the comments are justified. If you want to look in here, it's pretty funny. It kind of sticks with this is really the best you can do. Jack Waltz kind of nails it in the first comment, which is that it kind of sticks with me. It resonates unusually. +1. And this Suze Het is the author. I don't believe for a second that this is this person's first Wikidot account on the SCP Wiki. I think this is somebody's alt. No big deal, obviously. But yeah, basically we got this surrealist sort of thing being picked up on here. So, yeah, I would definitely encourage you to read this. I would definitely encourage you to look at the comments. I think that they do a very good job of trying to capture, which is probably the best you can do. Let's move on. SCP-6, oops, I don't want to do that. SCP-6381. And let's start, as we always do, with our good friend, Brian. Tell us what this is.
A logical anomaly that presents itself as logical. It is also a nerve cluster in the small intestine. Illogically, someone can metaphorically be inside or outside this nerve cluster.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Okay, so you have to understand a couple of things about this article. First of all, it's very brief. Dr. Fern said something really great here. Who wields the pen shapes the world. So true. So true. I can't ever remember the historical figure's name, but there's like this person who is pivotal to the French Revolution, who basically sat in a bathtub all day and basically just like wrote manifestos and stuff. And that's basically what caused in a romanticized interpretation, idealistically, historically, that was sort of a very prominent thing that caused the French Revolution to happen. I'm sure Harmony knows what I'm talking about, but don't know if she's here. All right, so this is 6381. It is, as Brian says, as this sentence also says, a nerve cluster located throughout the small intestine in which an individual can be metaphysically inside or outside of. And so we're sort of flirting with nonsense, but it's doing it, once again, very skillfully. Clearly the individual knows what they're doing who's written this sentence. And if you click on the cross link, and I usually try not to do this because I want the article to stand on its own feet by the strength of its own legs. But we're taken to SCP-2719, and if you don't know about this article, it's really one of the more memorable curiosities of the SCP Wiki, particularly by Series 3. It's this very strange logic puzzle that has its roots in coding, which is a little obviously beyond my expertise, but most people's expertise, and yet nonetheless, this article obviously is very well received, and it tells quite a story with just the most abstract of colors, barely formed thoughts, are just so intricately weaved throughout this thing. It's sort of like a very thin spider's web, where if you're of a certain mass, you'll just tear right through it. But if you're delicate enough, you can kind of trace it and treat it like a road. And that's kind of what this article does. And so all that to say, this is really a clone attempt of that article. It follows the exact same sort of logical puzzle, although it deconstructs it into color codings and puts it into the small intestine. But it does this metaphysically inside or outside of is exactly what, as the one we just looked at, is SCP-2719. That's basically a description of what that is. You take the same thing and you treat it. This is really the part where, once again, my eyes roll. I really hate this stuff. Don't be fooled. Like this very cringy, try hard, sort of extra narrative, sort of a stylized text that's thrown in here that, once again, you would see on somebody's live journal, for example. If you're going to be that sort of format breaking and format irreverent, you should do it in the way of the last article we just saw. All or nothing, balls to the wall. This sort of like dilly-dallying around with it, this sort of two-step of trying to be highly abstract and throwing in this live journal, excerpt, and then going back to the abstract. It's just a note that's completely out of key. It just sounds really bad. So there's a few other things about this that are just really odd, that may or may not work for you. The object class is anomalous, which sort of is a truism. I think they're all somewhat anomalous. So that's interesting. Not sure what to think about that. The fact that this is an SCP-2719 reheat, attempt in the microwave may be enough for you to not like it. Because basically it's just, I mean, there's no potential, I hate to say it, there's no potential that this could ever be, you know, as good as the original. I think the author knows that. The author would probably be the first to tell you that. But anyway, so yeah, the alt-spaced cringe out of universe text, it interrupts what otherwise is, you know, pretty good abstract tone, abstract writing here. So anyway, just to summarize this briefly for you, I do recommend the read because it's so short. You might as well. But the red data logs are suggesting sort of abstract concepts. They get a little too florid for me. It really lacks the stricter internal logic of 2719 that really is imperative because it's what guides you through the puzzle. This is a lot more nebulous. There's not really a lot to follow or grab onto here. And so it tries to be too abstract with some abstract concepts as opposed to abstracting very, very grounded, very mathematical concepts such as what you see in coding and logic and things like this. And so this doesn't really click or speak to me as an article. Its whole process is like the ending of maybe the one we saw before, where it tries to be a little abstract. That was what was that, 6337? No, sorry, the one before that, the 6281, where basically it was the monolith that didn't have a good ending. It basically tries to kind of find a spot between the two where you're not quite as balls to the wall absurd as the last one we looked at, which is 6337, and it tries to be a little more down to earth, I think, but it just doesn't work. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It just lacks the brute surrealism that we saw in the previous article that makes that work. Anyway, this is somewhere in the middle between the last two. The intelligence through obfuscation is a problem for me. You know, it's one thing to be beyond my intelligence and have me just be wowed by how much smarter you are than me. But it's another thing to just sort of like not give me enough and sort of wink that you know, this is smart and I can't really grab hold of anything. It's just, that's kind of what this article feels like. But I think that's what it's kind of going for. It's not really trying to be anything huge. It's sort of like an amuse-bouche if it were a dish, like just a very small one bite kind of thing that introduces a larger meal. That's kind of what I think this wants to be. It's happy to be what it is. So I can imagine the author of this is very pleased. I think the author basically just wanted to give sort of an homage and sort of trace the footsteps of one of their hero articles in the abstract school of this genre, which I think is still dominated by Malice Aforethought, by the way, despite Malice Aforethought, as far as I understand, having not written for quite a while. But yeah, I think the article just is, it's a little too droopy in my opinion. But let's talk about who the author is. Bread Tyrant. Bread Tyrant, I'm impressed with. Bread Tyrant is putting out articles at a scary pace. If I was in the car with Bread Tyrant, I would be telling Bread Tyrant to slow down. Whether or not Bread Tyrant is, a Formula One tier driver with the speed at which these articles are coming out, I don't know. But most of them are just sort of bite-sized. They're highly abstract, and so this certainly is fitting in the style of Bread Tyrant, who's certainly carving a niche with these sorts of very thought-provoking articles. All right, but once again, even though I don't like this article very much, I would give it a recommendation because it's short. All right, SCP-6591, moving right along. We're making pretty good time. We're at about 2 hours. I've let myself rant just a bit more because we don't have as many. But anyway, so 6591. This is, well, let's get our old buddy Brian to talk to us.
An average dragon, but one that produces what sounds a lot like a pickle from its mouth. Interestingly, it is never called a pickle in article.
Yeah, so this is an average dragon. That's the first sentence in the description. An average dragon, which is like, okay, you're already fucking with us because, dragons aren't average. The author clearly didn't say an average sized dragon. This is just an average dragon. So we're already sort of playing with the backdrop of preconceived notions here, namely that we would think that a dragon is anything but average, even in this context of the Foundation. So, and then the footnote specifies that its weight and height or length are normal, but that really sets the tone for the entire article. We have a dragon here who is anomalous in the sense that if it's not anomalous already because it's a dragon, it's anomalous in the sense that it can produce vegetables from its mouth, a particular vegetable, which is basically a cucumber. And this is what it says. It appears similar to a cucumber. I would have appreciated a footnote here, by the way. Though it is notably sour, curved, and covered in swellings. So if you haven't picked up on it, traces of an acidic compound have been found on it. Foundation personnel have so far been unable to grow replicas of a pickle. That's because a pickle is a pickled cucumber, and you can't grow them. You can just grow cucumbers. And so this is having a lot of fun. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very clever. It's letting us know up front that it's gonna mess with us a little bit. It's certainly describing a pickle. It never describes it as a pickle, and that is just a perfect synopsis of what this article is. So I think breaking it down just a little further. Let's see. Yeah, breaking it down a little further. So I think the main focus of the article is like a juxtaposition and thinking, feeling things. So on the one hand, you have thinking, feeling things in an organization in a format that tries, really by design to minimize those things. So for example, we can look back at Series 1, which had zero room to give to any characterization or emotional arc whatsoever. Obviously that's changed, but that's sort of the premise of this cold, but not cruel, calculating sort of Foundation. So you have this sort of tension, that builds between the desire of thinking and feeling things to express themselves and the genre, which here is sort of given an oppressive treatment, to those things. And actually, if you want to skip ahead to the comments, just because I've already read them, the author later describes this as magical realism and SCP, which as two tones are entirely repel one another. So it's kind of like an oil and water situation here. I think this is a really good character study and allegory, in part, and a little too heavy-handedly to bemoan clinical tone and the format at large. For example, you have lines such as this one, that feeling really begins to set in when a topic is discussed in a scientific matter. Even that which is inexplicable is boiled down to simple cause and effect until it feels as mundane as gravity. That's why I like other stories. This goes on. We can see another example. Do you plan on only containing what is inexplicable? Do you actively try to understand it, or do you try to explain it? So once again, it's sort of poking at the inhumanity of what is classically Foundation. And then this other line here. I don't particularly care if they're trying to explain it or whatever. I think this is all absurd regardless. So at this point, the characters really are truly thinly veiled. I think the author has really become a ventriloquist by this point, saying that reading is all about the feeling and the fun of it. For example, another later diatribe is in this sort of white text. In fact, this is a strange effect where if you hover over the text, it actually goes from being almost invisible to legible. But in this hidden text, which also adds sort of one extra nudge of author as ventriloquist to this message that's embedded in here, it says, I could never get into the stuff the documentation, since it feels like it's just happening without a cause. So there's this philosophical inquisition leveled at the Foundation and the containment fiction format in general, and it doesn't really relent, with the characters sort of low-key mocking the setup of the Foundation, the personnel. In fact, as we get lower into the article, there we have this Dr. Bolgovo who's coming in to sort of be a researcher for this strange vegetable, this strangely pickled cucumber that no one understands. And he says things like, "I've detected the faint scent of vinegar. It's difficult to describe or smell." Yada, yada, yada. So basically, there's a little bit of absurdism going on here, a little bit of that surrealist sort of note that we're observing is sustaining itself over a lot of the articles coming out of the SCP right now, where it's kind of mocking the personnel. They can't figure out what a pickle is. Like they get a dragon, they can capture the dragon, they can explain the dragon, they can give it, procedures and strict, once again, sort of oppressive directives, but they completely miss the forest of the trees, and they can't understand that this is a pickle coming out of this average dragon's mouth. So this is once again another really, really good treatment of something I usually hate, which is making researchers look very dumb. So despite making the researchers look very dumb here, in the sense that they can't figure out what a pickle is, it at the same time avoids the pitfalls of Neo-Law Foundation, which is a huge accomplishment, I think, for the author. It's sort of like someone dancing on the edge of Neo-Law Foundation and never falling in, sort of playing around with it, as if to fly circles around it. So kudos. There's some really, really great lines in here. Let's look at this one, if I can bring it up. And even if I haven't seen it, it's just added to a long list of those things I have seen. I think it's pretty funny. And then I liked this line: "As far as I'm concerned, we're of equal intelligence. I'm not even that well informed. I'm just very experienced with communicating." Did you know there was a time when I would have been locked in here, not because of a vegetable, but because I'm a dragon? So there's a lot of really good lines. In here. There's a passage about the sense of smell and how unique it is to the human attempt at description. But anyway, so yeah, I think the poetics of this article, the surrealist poetics, I think they come across a little too forced, a little too directed, and a little too transparent to make any lasting intellectual connections. It's almost like a pickup line that somebody tries to play straight and pick up a chick with. I mean, it's like, okay, you just played that thing straight. Like, it's not going to do anything for me. I kind of feel like that with this. That's what this does, in its sort of directedness in these what are clearly sort of larger nodes of more transparent social commentary when it comes to this specific place on the internet and this format. Let's see. So there's some small things here. At least one time a question ends with a period, and the character actually oscillates from Mitch Russell. So up here the character is named Midge Russell, and then down here it's named Mitch Russell. And if that's not a mistake, then I missed that. It looks like a mistake to me. There's a strange line in the containment procedures talking about, if necessary for testing purposes, microscopic recording equipment is to be implanted within this SCP's food, and that just never really comes back around. So I just found myself remembering that oddly. But anyway, I would recommend this article just because, once again, it's another instance in this procession of surrealistics that we're seeing that, once again, I think probably is sort of a combination of the surrealist department that we saw in the department con and this sort of like lingering Neo-Law Foundation aesthetic that I actually think is a good direction for those aesthetics finally. But the larger things here, the philosophical cruxes are either too visible, too on the nose, Sometimes they're really great, but they're buried in just this inexplicable decision to put these things in hidden text, which are not really well set, which are a little bit jarring for the read, and a little bit annoying to have to decipher, honestly, especially if you're on mobile and it doesn't have this effect of coming into view if you hover your mouse over it. And the one really good part, the sense of smell one, it doesn't really imprint on the larger philosophical messages that are attempted here, which are once again about the juxtaposition of an institution being a stand-in for the writing format that coldly denies certain ranges of the expressional spectrum and tries to rat in a cage against those restrictions in the most allowable ways possible. But in the end, I think the push for the magical realism side of this becomes a little too saturated, and both of the components fall out of the careful suspension that I think the author is trying to mix thoroughly here. So it's too well written for, I think, a downvote. It's just that the author has, once again, set a very high bar for themselves with an ambitious cocktail here, and it just doesn't quite hit the tongue in the right way. So, but all in all, I think you should read it. The rating of 22, I think, is, I think it's a fair rating. And the author of this is Little Fiery One, which I think is a pretty great name. Moving right along, we are getting close here. 6833. Yeah, I had this as 6883. All right, I need to get some water. Brian, why don't you tell us what this article is about? Brian, you missed your cue, buddy. Okay, I guess Brian is probably getting some water himself, or he's in the bathroom. So I'll get this one. So, SCP-6833. This is a memetically named pharmaceutical that reduces the need to urinate by instilling a wormhole in the human bladder. It is not Dado. I know you are already thinking that is not. The A designation is a pocket dimension that the wormhole goes into, and a B designation are humanoids that are gelatinous, and they are living in that -A pocket dimension. And these -Bs have an advanced civilization. So you may be putting the pieces together and seeing where this is going, but you might be surprised where it ends. The civilization from urine trope has kind of been done before. I think Rounderhouse did a pretty successful one that everybody probably remembers about civilizations starting from other species' urine. Although this takes a step down the ancestral tree, so instead of aliens to humans, it's humans to bacteria. So I'm not really enthusiastic about the read just off the get-go, and this is a really long article. This is a tremendously long article. We've got tons of dense exploration and descriptions, and then that's not even the end of it. There's a current version at the end. So I'll try my best just to get through this, to leave you with an impression. Of course, that's my job, I think, is to give you enough information to see if you want to read it. So I think the story progresses naturally. It's escalated in good places with believable motives. There's sort of this punch trading between the Foundation and the antagonist that I think is pretty entertaining. The thinking and the dialogue here can shine at times. There's a lot of dialogue in these video logs and whatnot. I think that can shine at times, even through the spelling and grammatical errors that are really all over this thing, and the uninteresting toilet humor that is played to the tune of an adolescent. So, for example, this image is supposed to be a ocean of urine. That yellow coloration is not just an aesthetic choice. It's supposed to be about urine. So, basically, this gets a little hackneyed when the author installs what is basically a toilet in the ocean as a stand-in for climate change. So, yeah, it kind of becomes a big excuse for potty humor, but in typical fashion these days makes the misstep of declining to be a J, when actually, once again, I think that it would actually help up in this case.
A memetically named
there you are.
pharmaceutical that...
Hey, Brian, thanks, buddy. You are way late. I might need to fire you, man. Brian.
Fuck, sir.
Yeah, well, shouldn't be late. We'll see. So the clinical tone of this is, I would say, rickety. For example, you have sentences like this. Oops, I just clicked on a link. Let's try that again. All right, you have sentences like this. Known details of it are restricted to a single planetary object with a divergent biosphere from Earth. That's not good. This one's not good. It's in a footnote. A military force that specializes in traversing areas and realities too small for regularly sized humans to explore, requiring members to be anomalously shrunk down in specific sizes depending on the location. Shrunked is not a word. It actually is used multiple times in this article. So that's a little weird. And then let's take another look at this one. The camera activates to a interior view. That should be an. The camera activates to a interior view of the SCPs Purus, lighten only by red lights. Okay, here's a line. I don't know, sir. They are threatening a nationwide murder. Okay. The entity adjusts a ring-shaped device that surrounds its head, which resultantly beeps. That's supposed to be beeps. But unfortunately the typo is the most favorable part of that sentence. The rest of it is worse than the typo. So there's just absolutely piss poor word choice here. That's a pun. Spelling errors, typos are just way too common. Here's another one. They seem to value our lives with an F at former times. Let's see. Oops, don't want to do that. He directs the diagram it to SCP-6833-B. What else can we see here that's just egregiously incorrect? And we can't just let civilians just be aware of one anomaly only. There's too many justs in that one. Once again, shrunked. The word shrunked is used multiple times. There's a lot of a and its confusions all over this. A declarative sentence ends in a question mark, and there's a moment where a comma is immediately followed by a period. Let's see that. That's, oh, he must have fixed it. Good for you. Well, there was. What else? It's just all over this article. It's just really, really bad. It looks like they've gone back and cleaned up this a little bit, because I had a lot more errors caught in this. Some sentences fail to capitalize where words after a semicolon are capitalized. I wonder if they fixed this. Nope, they haven't fixed this. SCP XXX still shows up, and it's actually in the caption of the image. And this has been on the site for a week. In addition, there's some real poor situational awareness on the part of the author. So, for example, we have this line: brief 1.5 seconds of silence is totally redundant. 1.5 seconds is brief. You don't need to tell us that it's redundant. And say it's 1.5 seconds. And once again, why are we measuring centiseconds? You know, why are we measuring half of a second? You shouldn't say, is someone literally timing, you know, with a stopwatch? Why would you need to say 1.5 seconds when you could just say 2 or 1 or about 1 or about 2 seconds? It's just very, very poor situational awareness from the author, who doesn't really know what I think they're doing. And then there's this part that's talking about, so basically as described, there's a wormhole that basically is at the urethra exit of the bladder, and they want to explore it. So I think a real opportunity was lost here on the compositional decisionry of the author that would have easily set this into a more interesting direction. and that is that the author decided to make the exploration of this micro, some like microscopic stuff. And I think it would have been a lot more interesting if we had decided to somehow try to find a way to put normal-sized drones in somebody's pelvic cavity, or maybe slightly smaller than normal drones in someone's pelvic cavity. I think that would have been a really more interesting opportunity when it comes to how the Foundation personnel were going to try to explore this anomaly. Would have added a really nice horrific tone to it, to have like some serious open surgery to achieve that, or maybe even have a cadaver to see what doesn't work, a few times. But instead, we have shrink ray technology that's written into this to solve it instantly instead of the more rewarding path and thought process. And even the title of the article is really, really bland, and a really missed opportunity. Let's see what it is. It's called The Piss World. So, that's a bummer. That's a bummer. Anyway, there's a lot wrong with this article. I really, really wouldn't not recommend you read this article. It's got this dumb accessibility mode thing going on where you can view the true mode, and when you click on that, you're taken to a CSS theme that is not only the Department of Urology and has a urine jar on the background, and is this just really, really outstandingly bad piss color CSS theme, but you have this thing over here, the list pages module does not work recursively. Which is just amazing that the author either hasn't noticed this, by now, a week on the wiki, or doesn't care, or decides that this CSS theme is in highlighter yellow is worth having this garishly error message thing here on the side that tells you that something in the code is not working well. It's just astounding. So this, I think, easily to say is absolutely worth skipping. You're not missing a damn thing by not reading this article. So I hate to say that, but once again, this was a really, really, really long article, really difficult to get through. Starch Tuber is the name of the author. So hate to say it like that. I am more than happy to see people who I have written off surprise me and write a good article. So we'll be looking for that and hoping for that, because nobody wants to be remembered by shitty articles. All right, moving on. We are at SCP-6408, and I'm going to whip Brian into shape.
A God-shaped hole through which commandments are delivered. The anomaly commands those affected to do things.
I think this is another one just to skip ahead in an unusual fashion by us. It's also by Bread Tyrant, same author as a few ago. Once again, very abstract metaphysical entity represented by a picture. Besides that, because I don't really think a metaphysical representation makes a lot of sense, but besides that, I think this is a respectfully abstract attempt. The logs are interesting. They have this sort of throwback, no-nonsense feel that foreshadows this climax by including this no response in this response section. Most of these don't have a response, and so, it's kind of just hanging out there, and then finally gets to the end. It takes a rather abstract twist. It gets messed up really quick in there. This is also kind of a Series 1 or Series 2 sort of installment in this that I think helps, is that you've got things like cannibalism showing up out of the blue in here. The subjects that are in these instance tests obtain a superhuman strength. And that all this is told as subtly as the abstract and metaphorical sort of shape and tone of this article. I feel the image is something, like I want to say that I see some sort of Foundation-esque insignia in here. There's even a circle if you squint, but it's not really something I can put my finger on. I still don't really know what it is. So this is a respectable, tasteful, conceptual article. If you're into that, if you starting to think that you like Bread Tyrant's work, I think this is just another fine example of it. Nothing that's bombastic, It's really just kind of muted. But I think it's the person here certainly has a very solidified artistic direction and vision, and I think they're doing really interesting things. I think it's just a matter of time before Bread Tyrant just knocks one out of the park. I really do. As I go through puberty live. All right, moving on. We're going to try to speed up just a little bit because I think it's been like, you guys probably want to get out of here too. It's like 2 hours and 30 minutes almost, or 2 hours-ish. All right, 6794. Let's get Brian to help me out because my voice is going. Brian, buddy, help a guy.
A virus that causes a two-phase infection. It causes people to act strange over digital media, seclude themselves, and then fucking fold in half several times.
Oh my god. Yeah, this one. I remember this one really well. This is why I love not knowing who wrote the article. So there's this info thing here that I really don't find a lot of offense in because unlike where you list the author below the rating module, this is totally in-universe. I mean, a documentation is going to want to have some meta attribution data to it, whatever. You can find that there. That's totally in-universe. It's fine. It's optional. It's hidden. Cool. I have no problems with that. I love that. And I appreciate this particularly from the point of a critiquer who's trying to do a decent job here. Trying to do a good thing, because I want to stay as objective as possible. I don't want to have the author be told to me so that I have to have baggage, of what I know about the author, and it really robs a chance to adjudicate that author's work anew without anything getting in the way. So that's one thing that happened in this article. I read through it, and I think it's a really, really well written article. And I got to the end, and I had an idea of who it is. You may already know, because authors, even when they don't tell you who they are right up front, they have stylistic decisions that, if you pay attention to, you can basically know who it is before you ever look. Sorry, that's an old comment. So anyway, this one is, like Brian said, it's an infection. It's two phases. It causes people to act strange. It causes them to seclude themselves. And then basically you see just a tidal wave of body horror come in when these people somehow anomalously fold themselves into bits of origami, basically, human origami. This article does a really good job of grabbing the reader. The con procs are lightning fast and as electric as they are quick. The image gives little to no context, but this is convincing. It asks the reader to read on and does a good job at that. The description keeps this up with the portending phrase, minutes before the folding begins. In phase 2, minutes before the folding begins, and that's just dropped out of nowhere. You're like, what the fuck? The folding doesn't sound good. And it isn't once you get to it. There's a real clever utilization of the most horrifying part of this. It brings out the Foundation as masters of their science, something that I think is rare in the treatment of Foundation personnel, as we've said this stream before. And then the victim logs here in the first addendum are just immediately bone-chilling and treated with that whispered horror that the Foundation is really so good at doing. It somehow gets way more fucked up and has a sort of COVID from a lab vibe with body horror in it. And the very end reveals something that I'm surprised to see people had missed, but basically it ties to a larger GOI in the very last word. So this is actually a piece by Rounder House, if you hadn't figured that out yet, by the stylistic decisions of the CSS and the div. But this is just, once again, Rounder House can be a fantastic writer when he wants to be. I think he sort of slums to sort of an adolescent level for, social media points, basically, when I would rather see him do stuff like this all the time. Because when he does stuff like this, it's just, it's in the highest tier of writing in the genre. I think you can get into. You're in really good company when you can write this way, with some really old names too. So definitely recommend this one. It's not long. SCP 6794. Good job, Rounder House. All right, moving on. 6297. This let's see, is a very, very weird one. Brian, why don't you take a sentence or two?
A thaumaturgically enforced ritual homicide.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting this. Let me go ahead and get this out of the way. This is super long, and I fell asleep while I was trying to read this. Of course, that depends on a lot more things than just the content of this article, but I totally fell asleep like an old man when I was trying to read this article. So basically, we have a department of presumptive... here it is. Divination... I can't say that. Divination department up here. Department of Fictocritical Mythology. A lot of department work. Department of Presumptive Divination. So this sort of, once again, is sort of sustaining that DepartCon sort of lingering hangover in a lot of these articles that we're still seeing pop up. I think the Department of Presumptive Divination plays really cornily, in part thanks to the catchphrase atop the CSS, which you can see up here, which says eyes open, hands ready, and has some form of emoji separating the two. The department head goes by Madame, and so it kind of feels like an MTV circa millennia kind of show. Kind of like, I get like Fear, that show. I get Fear vibes from this. And of course, this is all about being a medium in some ways. So I can't help but see the character sort of as Jonathan Edwards in goth makeup. That's kind of the vibe I get from this. So I had to sigh when I looked at the scroll bar. Maybe you can see it vaguely over here. It's just super, super small. And then this is really where I think the dread turned into a sigh for me, is this line. For the sake of documenting the anomaly, this is in a log, sort of an addenda sort of thing. For the sake of documenting the anomaly, however, I've included peripheral information preceding and following my encounter that would normally be irrelevant to a log. And so this really becomes the in-universe excuse to embed straight-up fiction prose, straight-up fan fiction into the SCP. It's the author's way to post their novella to the SCP, complete with a preface, like forward, right here, as you can see, and get those sweet, sweet upvotes that they wouldn't normally get if they posted this to something like AO3, which probably would be a more appropriate place to post something like this, a fanfic site. Personally, it's obvious, it's distracting, it's jutting. If it was machinery, it'd be this odd bend that doesn't fit flush with the rest of the article. It's unsmooth. It just seems like bad strokes of craftsmanship in a cheap product, from China or something like that. It's kind of what this article looks like, just from a writer's perspective, a writer reading into another writer. So now I have to read the thing that I come to SCP to try to get away from, because this author didn't want to make this a tale. He wanted to make this an SCP, put the big boy pants on. So thank you to this author who I would describe as unfortunately indulgent in this case. But having said that, there are some fantastic lines of writing in this. The author is obviously incredibly gifted at writing prose and writing fanfic. Scent is intimate. You take it in. It's transgressive. Sweet as a dying star. Immensity distilled to a single point. Beneath the rotation of personalities over the year, there was a sense of identity here. I mean, there's a whole paragraph of excellent lines that I wrote down from this. I mean, that's one reason why it took me so long to get through it, is because I constantly had to stop and get the extracted line, because it's just so good. There's so many good lines in this. There's a dream sequence that's sort of dictated in this that's just evocative. It's profound. It's the heart of the tale. And it really, because this is about vampires, has a stake right through it. It's a real tonal shift in the character voice that happens during this during one of these logs, and it's just a total conversion. So it's just a really good job by the author here. But there's also some really, really, really bad lines. Just some real stinkers in here. Almost one for every good line. I tasted the events that brought about this moment and sucked the marrow from a rapidly narrowing future. An account of the vampire with apologies to Buffy and Van Helsing. While in fiction, dreams are recurringly depicted as prognostic, in truth, they are noticeably unreliable. So I jinxed the article too. At some point, like maybe halfway through, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't noticed a spag error, spelling or grammar error at all. And then I immediately came across one. You have to trust yourself in you ability to get it right the first time. And then there's another one that says, instead of saying it hasn't happened yet though, this says it hasn't happened yet through. The resting point of the story is pointed towards rather gaudily, in my opinion. The reader finally meets the protagonist's long-awaited and drawn-out transformation into a vampire, as if it were late for a scheduled meeting, and you're sitting there tapping your toes, and it finally arrives at the very, almost very end. The odd thing is that these really, really good sentences and these really, really terrible sentences can appear one right after the other, making for quite a whiplash of a read. Other similar sort of bipolar moments occur, like the requisition order right here, which is just a wonderful classical SCP, no narrative, all documentation way to push the story forward. And then that hugs very close to sort of what the containment fiction genre was meant for. And yet it's sandwiched between, once again, just pure uncut fan fiction. So ultimately this, I hate to say it this way, the dreaded this should be a J and the dreaded this should be a tail, but this is a tail masquerading as an SCP. And as a purist for the genre, that fact alone overrides any of the good sentences that I came across in this and the good storytelling that's in this as well. To me, this is a completely contrived compositional move. The divination logs, which are basically a thinly veiled excuse in the universe to try to attempt just a blatant internal monologue on documentation. That's a 0-day error for me, and the article did some fantastic applause-worthy things with the prose. It's great prose, it just is not good containment fiction, because it's not containment fiction to me. So I do not recommend this read. I mean, I think that if you're into tales, you could read this and be surprised because you would be excused for believing this was going to be an SCP, but it's not. It's a tale. So if you're into tales, which I'm not, I read SCP for the SCPs. I don't read SCP for the tales. I know that there are good ones on there. I'm not saying they're not good. I go other places to read tales, and people do it better, who are devoted to that thing and not so Swiss Army knife split between tales and SCPs. But this is a tale, and if you like that, I'd encourage you to give it a read because it's really well written. But it's just a shame. It's just real sad to see this author grab so hard for this. I think it's at plus 28, so I think that's, once again, it's good for a tale. I think it's fantastic for a tale. I think it would have the exact same rating if you made it into a tale, so I don't know what the author was really trying to pull. The author is Dodo Devil, who you may recognize as someone who is participatory in the Admonition Hub, I think, at times, sort of in that clique. So that kind of comes through with the CSS here, which looks good. But it's also just as cringy with what looks to be emojis up here. So that's 6297, and I unfortunately cannot recommend that read. All right, moving on, 6835. Brian, my voice is going, my man. Help me out here. Jesus.
An aerial warship that vanished and appears sporadically at high altitudes. It messes with other ships, ranging from communications equipment failure to catastrophic engine failure. This is set in an odd dimension and planet that measures things in hands, not feet.
Hey, Brian, this is a pretty short one. Do you mind just finishing this one for me, please?
Oddly a subpage of SCP-1835. It's clear we are still experiencing Deptcon residuals, this featuring a Department of Mythology and Folkloristics. Good cultural characterization here. We have a landlubber pejorative equivalent for the air. A casual, easygoing, agreeable article. Not much more to it, worth a quick read.
Yeah, there's some pretty good, excuse me, there's some pretty good character speak in here. It's just good writing, So let's see who the author is. Dr. Leonard, I don't know that one very well, so kudos. I think 29 is a good rating for this. Definitely would recommend this read. I think it's simple, it's easy, it's quick, and it's good. It's good. It especially if you like air fights and nautical stuff, or some kind of combination of the two. All right, SCP-6647. Let us get my man. Tell us about this one as we take a look at it.
A series of anomalous disappearances that are cognito-hazardous and antiemetic via information. The anti-meme is contagious via sight and attention. No one can recall the victims, and the article focuses on the interview of a couple, confused about a middle school-aged boy's room suddenly appearing in their house.
Yeah. So I think I want to say this was a rewrite of a previous article that didn't make it, sort of like a round 2. Maybe that's just not right, but I feel as though there's 100 articles on the wiki like this, where an anti-meme is applied to a loved one in a gone missing setting. It's just a garden variety use of the concept of an anti-meme. There really isn't anything setting this one apart either. And then in addition to that, the characterization is absolutely bland. It's totally plastic. For example, the protagonist says, "I'm fine, I guess, but I'm not sure what's going on. You people suddenly appeared on my house and took me here almost as if I'm a criminal. Could you please explain what's happening?" It's just very, very plastic dialogue and characterization. The only potential point of it, is some vague remembrance of the affected loved one. And this is supplemented by outsized, all caps, emotional reactions from this only character in this who could be relatable. And just by that point, it just gets, it's like a song that's too loud. You just want to turn it off and just move on to the next one. Really the most drama potential character is just totally glossed over very quickly. That's the father that's in this log here. Just barely amounts to a footnote. So it doesn't seem like the author has a really good knack for knowing how to treat an article. It's almost like watching, once again, my analogy of cooking. It's like watching a chef trying to cut up a fruit that it's never seen before, that doesn't know what to do with. The dialogue here is average to just maybe mildly below average at best. The flow is just slow and dripping. None of the situational tension that can make something that's slow-paced great. There's a moment here where an agent is called on the phone in to bring a laptop into the into the investigation room, which adds 3 minutes of waiting. Of just nothing, of just waiting, the two participants just looking at each other until that agent arrives with the laptop. And I'm not sure at all why that is there, because the present agent could simply have the laptop ready, since they knew this would be something they would show the person in this interview. So the Foundation agent also casually discloses the tactic of amnestization. Just straight up. Just like, hey, oh yeah, we amnestize people all the damn time. So it's just something of very low compositional quality, all of this. There's an attempt at a stimulant that falls really flat. The kid's ghost shows up and the agent simply looks away, knowing that it's a cognito hazard. And that's it. That's really how it ends. So, I mean, the attempt to dramatize this to scale with a bunch of site personnel seemingly vanishing after seeing the anti-memes, but this is solved by the site director. Quick thinking site director, in a sense, after it's introduced. It's just, it shows up and it immediately ends. So this is apparently sort of a self-sacrifice kind of thing that should be moving emotionally, where the site director sort of attempts to be heroic in the last dying breath, tagging the meme and letting everybody know about it. Check out this goodbye right here. I can hear the screams getting closer and closer, each one of them ending abruptly. It seems like I got no time left. Well, it was a pleasure working with you guys! ! Farewell. And that's how the guy dies. So it's just totally lifeless characters in this. It's just Barbie doll levels of anatomical believability in these characters. There's the 05 that are introduced, and like we said in an earlier article that actually did this well, this one is unfortunately not that way. It's totally unjustified. They step in to basically cease all testing, which is a trope in and of itself. They deem it too dangerous, quote, not only for the Foundation, but for the whole of the human race. So, as an article, this is just a complete non-starter for me. It's a group of disappearances. It's really unexplored tonally. It's completely disconnected from the situation the anomaly is. Like, for example, it basically says that this is a series of disappearances between 2004 and 2012, but we're really only looking at one in this article, so it's really confused about its own self. We're left to wonder what's going on with the rest of these characters. So anyway, I'm sorry, I think the rating is accurate to generous, and I think this is just an absolutely awful article. I don't think this should be on the SCP Wiki. I think that the SCP Wiki should be of the standards to have this completely gone by now. But it's hanging around, so, you know, hey, you got to start somewhere, and good luck to this author. I almost feel bad telling you who it is, Lucas667. So, but hey, don't give up. Rounder House started with the Beast Pits, so you never know. All right, 6284 is our next one. Brian, why don't you help me out, my man?
A wall-embedded logical gap in a Foundation site storms ends up being an anti-emetic cover.
Yeah, so another anti-memetic cover. This really is what we just saw in the last article. What's it a cover for? Yep, you guessed it, a missing person that people still distantly and vaguely recall and sort of ambiguously mourn. So there's a note from a researcher, Dalloway. Researcher Dalloway seems to be affected by SCP Mute-J. Don't know if you know that one. MEWTJ. And seems to be based on the complete caricature of a British royal. So, for example, we have lines like this. As I was walking out of my little gilded prison chamber in order to meet up with Dr. Orson in the cafeteria, I was drawn into a quite peculiar sight indeed, as, well, encompassing a good portion of the wall to my left was a fissure, quite large actually, and very deep. You know, yada, yada, yada. You get the picture. It's a British royal caricature. Probably has a single spectacle and a Monopoly mustache. That's just kind of the vibe I get from that guy. So once again, I think the footnotes tell us that this is sort of remora of the Department Con, so we still have these sort of leftovers trickling in. We have the Department of Counter-Conceptual, Unreality, Metaphysics, Miscommunications, the Department of Surreality, the Department of Parapsychology, the Department of Abstractions, whatever. So it just feels like leftovers that have probably gone bad. The last sentence of the description makes it seem like you have to cannibalize people who don't believe in God in order to see the anomaly. So this is the last line. During his stay, he was assigned temporarily, yada, 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 due to his constant department-mandated agnostic consumption. So if you don't know what an agnostic is, like in the universe of SCP, you might be a little worried about this guy eating agnostics, just a certain flavor that people who don't believe in God have, and it's just delicious. But thankfully there's a cross-link here that tells you that agnostics are like drugs. It makes you doubt things, kind of like amnestics makes you forget things. The mobile task force assigned to this has what I can only describe as headphones as their Greek symbol. Let's see if we can find that. Mobile task force. There it is. Don't know if you can see that. Let's try to zoom in right here. Yeah. Mobile task force headphones. So, just amazing what people will do to try to stand out. What else? So the descriptors all throughout this article are just oddly specific. It's kind of like the vibe you get from listening to a wine snob trying to impress somebody. And so we get that sort of strange detail, like completely needless, completely unrealistic detail, all in this. Let's see, open file. Yeah, this is bad. This is bad. So the clinical tone really is fatigued all the way throughout, especially footnote 5. Yeah, I mean, what can I say about this? You got basically a giant a giant section here that's just totally redacted, except for the links because the CSS show up through the black highlighter. It just looks really dumb. You have to highlight it in order to read it. It's just very obnoxious. It's totally meaningless. It just adds another step in the way of me trying to get this. The character sort of Monopoly guy speak is all up over here again. It's completely overwrought. It just unintentionally leads to a cartoonish character. It's trying to establish some propriety and some levity to the intelligence of the character, but it just comes off as just stupid. The language attempts to be so florid and so poetic as to almost lose any meaning whatsoever. So, like, listen to this line. In this other place made of the remnants of the never heart, hyphenated, the man knew a catharsis that bled from his pores in a shout wail, hyphenated, that pierced through the pinpricked, apostrophed white that was scattered through the air. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Nobody knows. Just trying to be poetry in the middle of a black highlighted collapsible spoken by a Monopoly guy. So, yeah. As you might expect, in the actual author post, we have lyrics posted. So that just fits very too well with the miserable experience we've had in this SCP. I cannot recommend this SCP at all. It's just totally unimaginative in my opinion, and I'm so sorry. I think 13 is. I guess it's okay. Quicksilvers is the author. Don't hold it against Quicksilvers. We all have terrible articles all the time. This next one is going to be interesting. 6423 ARC. And so this one is a bit short on the commentary, so let's just get Brian to read this.
A demolished automobile factory that may or may not have been anomalous, we'll never know now. Creepy, finely tuned pacing, with an unsettling ambient drone until the horrors being cooked start to take shape. Stellar dialogue.
Yeah, so I don't want to say too much about this, except it is also written by somebody who I wasn't 100% surprised to see having written this, because most of this is just absolutely great. Particularly the focus of this article is just, it's like a bullet. It gets you directly where you need to go very quickly, and really the dialogue carries it the rest of the way. I mean, the dialogue is so believable. The characters are so believable. Harcourt is just a very smart character. It's not easy to make people like really smart. You have to be smarter than the character to make people look smart. And so, the author clearly has a lot of character-born intelligence that's put into this Harcourt. I think one thing that I saw that was a little odd is that he's referred to as Agent Harcourt the whole time, and then once you get to another collapsible, it looks like it was fixed. Previously, it was Doctor, and I was like, oh man, did they mean to make the agent a doctor? And it like rose all these strange questions of like promotions, and I don't know, it didn't work. But this is absolutely a recommendation. This is written by Rounderhouse, who is really just pumping them out semi-automatically, not quite like Bread Tyrant full auto, but this is a really talented article. I think it's actually well below the rating that it deserves. You got really a really well placed cross link here, because it kind of ties into another one of his articles that I don't want to ruin for you, but I mean, it's just is a really nice way to set this for what it is, which is a prequel. It's just like it's almost like, if you've ever seen that Star Wars transition that's fabricated, but is the seamless transition from Rogue One into Episode 4. That's like what this is. It's just a really, really good job of taking you up almost to the moment of another very, very famous article. So, once again, Rounderhouse, I will always fault Rounderhouse. I will always laugh at Rounderhouse for doing so many Neo-Law Foundation articles. I mean, he's got probably more than I can count on both hands and feet. But when he writes up to his capabilities like this, you know, there's nobody, you can't really be better than this. You can be as good as this. It's really, really, really hard, really rare to be better than this sort of proficiency at the genre. So kudos to Rounderhouse on this one. Please don't write Neo-Law Foundation anymore. You know, you're way too good at this. Your characters are way too intelligent for you to be slumming in Neo-Law Foundation. All right, so we are almost done. 6809. Let us get my man to help me out here.
Homemaker automatons by a company whose overpromised and underdelivered mission statement is to decentralize robotics and AI and put power in the hands of the consumer in the robotics revolution. The R&D team is woefully out of their element here, so the CEO turns to shady investments from Foundation notorious goers for outsourcing, in order to meet the promised deadline. The product delves into ill-fit attempts to pigeonhole intelligence into gender roles and lays the self-loathing, self-disappointment, and feelings of inadequacy on thick.
Yeah, so this article I think was my least favorite of the whole week. I hate to say that, but I got to be honest. I got a prerogative to stick to here. I think this was absolutely the worst article that I read this week. And it wasn't necessarily that there was anything wrong with it. I think it was fine. I think it was written well. I mean, you got a nice cast of characters here. You've got a clear villain here. You got a nice development. You've got nice setting. You've got believable things happening here. It's just that it just seems like it was that unexciting movie that nothing really happened for a long time, and you're just like, I mean, I was honestly begging for this thing to end. It just would not end. Just wouldn't end. It's like a movie with all those fake endings, and you're just like, you're like ready to get up out of the theater, and you're like, oh fuck, it's not over with yet. But yeah, no, I think, I don't know. This is I can't recommend it just because it's too long. I don't think it actually justifies its length in terms of quality. I think some of the characters are really overdone. Like, they're really hard to kind of believe. I mean, I get that the article maybe derives a lot of its momentum emotionally from showing how shitty people can be. But for example, there's a party scene, and it just seems like everybody in the party is just totally it's like the shittiest person you can imagine. It's like if you took like the shittiest people possible and then got them all in one room and, ran them through a test or something like that. Like, that's what this is. It's just, it gets to be a little much. It's just a little overwhelming. Something that could be well used here as something like a spice is just completely dominant. It's just completely overdone. It's just almost inedible. It's like eating something that's highly tannic, and all the saliva all the moisture just completely gets sapped out of your mouth completely. It's just not good. This article is written by. It's a nice premise. You've got basically a really shitty CEO who promised things he can't deliver on. Glass Automaton is a fitting name for this article. So it's a nice premise. You really set up this sort of like drama, but it's just so mundane. It's so like corporate, like cubicle kind of drama, and it doesn't move this efficiently enough, I think, through its own length, and so it gets really, really sloggy. It gets really, really dragged out, and some of it gets a little like you just need to wrap it up. You just need to get on with something. So I can't recommend this read. I think 19 is, I think it's probably a decent rating for this. I'm sure it'll hit the right spot for people. I'm actually surprised it doesn't have a content warning on it, just given you see a lot of emotional abuse. There is, I want to go back here for a second because there is one line in here. There's actually a set of lines that I can use to summarize what I think about this article. Let's do... Here it is. So if I wanted to summarize this article using its own dialogue, I would do this. Attendees listening to Unit 005 appear to become disinterested. A guest says, "Is that it? Seriously?" The 05 says, "If you want, I could explain the tests." And another guest says, "God, no. Sounds boring as hell. You got anything interesting? Some kind of robot might know, but not us?" Yeah, so that's basically the article in a nutshell. It's just like, please don't explain the tests. Please no, this is boring as hell. It sounds more boring. Just don't do it. Just save me the misery. That was a hard article to get through, I'm not going to lie. I don't recommend that at all. 5258. So automatically we see this is by Marcellus D. Rains. I wish they wouldn't do that. I have to give my full disclosure about Marcellus D. Rains. I don't really have anything to say about that person. We did a review of one of theirs last week with a little boy who became a spider in the school, and I thought that was a particularly bad article. I thought that was probably in the bottom 5 of the week, so I try not to hold that against authors because they could at any moment impress. This one was something that I'm having a little hard time remembering, so let's get Brian to tell me, and then I'll tell you.
OFT alien ship descends onto a beach, causes public notice, and some interesting marine ecosystem changes. The authors attempt to get in on the fish meme infecting the SCP Wiki while there is still some getting to get. The lone, decipherable message from the aliens is Agaloth outside system. Need fish, turned up to 11 and gone cosmic. I will be honest, the note at the end goes over my head a bit. I guess they wanted to fish, got the fish in parts at least, and meant for it to be less of a mess.
Yeah, so this is, I think, someone else's luggage being thrown onto the bandwagon of fishing. And we've gotten so much content now that it's having to escape and retreat and spread into sort of more abstracted ways of coming about. And this one, like Brian just said, thank you, Brian, basically tries to take this and apply it to a cosmic scale. So you have basically what are alien fishermen who come down to Earth and who find a way to get a large catch, a large quantity of a particular species, I think, that they're looking for. And they find a very interesting way of doing that and of securing the actual fish and processing it. That's what I took from this. But I agree with Brian. How funny is that? That I don't really understand the end of this. It kind of ends on what feels like a Rounder Houseian one-line exit dance off stage. Kind of like the old vaudeville, like you have the top hat and the cane and you dance off stage, into the curtains, into the wings. That's kind of what Rounder House does at times. And this kind of feels like it's trying to be that, but I have no clue what this is supposed to mean. I think it's meaning that they're sorry they had to harvest the catch in the way that they did, which was explosive, but I don't really know. I think 17 is fair for this because I have no fucking clue what's going on. And unfortunately, the author post doesn't really give us any more insight. So it's kind of a shrug, honestly. This author is really, really good at clinical tone. I'll tell you that. Really good at clinical tone. So this is mostly clinical tone. So it's a nice read. I don't like it very much, but I recommend that you read it because once again, it's short and you can form your own opinions of that one right there. Just a few more to get through and we'll call it a night. We've been doing this for quite a while. SCP-6460. Let me get Brian working on that while I try to remember what this one is about.
An anomalous corn maze that selectively turns into an extra-dimensional space, whose form is invulnerable.
Yeah, so this is interesting because when I read this, it was not just a few days ago. I don't think there was an image. I think this image is new. Yeah, I remember this one pretty well. I think that this one is pretty creepy. I think it basically has is really a minimalist sort of article. It's not trying to do anything fancy. It doesn't start with anything that's mind-blowing and doesn't pretend to be that. It basically just starts with a cornfield maze, which most people, I think, have some familiarity with, which offers a nice insertion point for a lot of the emotional attachment that'll sort of pull the reader through this article. And then it does a good job, I think, in a few ways. It casts Parawatch, pretty well believable in this. Although there's some weird like try hard, using the number 2 instead of the word 2 kind of stuff. I mean, not a big deal. And then I think the D-class expeditions are pretty effective. It's rare that we see that, I think, these days. You have to be pretty good to make a good D-class exploration log in this day and age. And I think they do it really, really well. We feel for the D-class, but we don't get too, bogged down by, let's say the emotional indignity they might have towards something like their situation. It doesn't get too indulgent. Although there's some typos here, some strange things that stick out. Like this line says D13 whatever walks into the entrance of SCP 64601. There's an extra 1 there, making this Series 65. No, wait. Hold on. I'm wrong. Series. Oh, man. Math right now. My brain is too fried. Anyway, it's like series way too much. We're like way too much in that series. Oh, well. Phew. Yeah. This is good. I like this one a lot. The Conprocs are easy. Nice clinical tone throughout this. Nothing egregious. There's some really cool little tricks happening in here. The researchers, you really get sort of like a sort of like mixing board sort of perspective on this. You see a lot of like a lot of these researchers sort of speaking to one another while they've muted their microphones to the D. So these sorts of things, obviously, that have been happening throughout all of the Foundation's history, and it's just nice to kind of see it played out here. It's really cool. Yeah. I think also this article has somewhat of a problem. It has the old, like, hey, everything you just read, sorry. And, it's hard to do that well because, if you remember a short story where a guy is hung and he falls into the river and he swims away and there's like this big chase scene and you think he gets away, but it's like, oh, by the way, it was all hallucination and he died. He got hung. It's kind of like that. I mean, it's kind of like this 2-step sort of like fake out that you do for the reader. And so that can be a good thing if it's done well. But the other end of that is that basically everything I read was just kind of a lie. And so it's like, okay, well, let me start over again. So I do recommend this read, though. I think it's well put together enough, particularly in the exploration logs, to merit a read. It might even be freaky for you. It wasn't freaky for me, but certainly terrifying if you want to put that much immersion into the read. So this is at +13. I think that's pretty low, honestly, for this. It's newer, maybe a couple days, but I think that's pretty low for this. I think it probably deserves to be a little better at this point in time. This was written by Real Surreal Sir. Once again, we have more surreality showing up on the wiki. Those things are not coincidences. Do not mistake them as such. All right, sir. Almost done here. 6727. I'm going to get Brian to read this one. Ooh. That's a great beat.
A memetic documentation, and specifically, a classification-based anomaly, potentially meant to be a Trojan, thermobaric, hazard concept to the Foundation that reduces global coherency. It feeds off inconsistencies, reminiscent of pataphysics or SCP integer, in that it abstracts other things into itself, such as Carl Jung. Carl June. A 105 council member. A clever format screw and remarkably abstract. Almost to the point that it doesn't make sense. However, there is clearly an internal logic to this and one that hits the right notes.
Yeah, Yeah, this one is, I want to say it's Bread Tyrant again. Yes, this is the third one from Bread Tyrant this week. And once again, it is a clone of another article. I think I was just looking at that here. This article here, which I haven't read. So, unfortunately, what Bread Tyrant is doing here, you basically have to understand these things. You sort of need to understand these things. The dependency on these previously existing articles is really, really strong. It's really central here. And so I think that really is either, it's saving grace or it's big problem. Because if you do know about it, I'm sure this is just buzzing. But if you don't, for example, me doing this every week, I would have to go read this whole article to I think even, get, what this article is trying to do. And so it's not for everybody, just philosophically, I don't like the idea of an article relying so heavily on something else, particularly when it's not really canonized, or hub stuff, hub work. It's just asking quite a lot, and I get it, it's got its place. I think once again, Bread Tyrant is consistently got about a 20-25 out of the gate, cushion here, and well deserved because they're all well written. But it's too abstract with too much demand. Too many co-requisite or prerequisite coursework in here for me to actually connect with this in any meaningful way. So if you are a big fan of SCP-4857, which I do remember reading at one point, this whole model red and model blue thing was real inventive. If you're a big fan of that and you know it by heart and you don't need any reminding, this article is probably going to be for you. But if not, kind of in a characteristic thing for Bread Tyrant, like if you're not finely tuned for the reception, you're just going to walk away from this thinking that, was this a me thing or was this a author thing? Like, I'm not sure, but I didn't get it. So, but it's relatively short, so check it out anyway. It's really dense, really, really hard to get through. It really requires you at every step to just like weight lift the entirety of the concept that's being presented. It's not easy. It's very demanding of an article. All right, SCP 6381. And if we just talked about how dependent Bread Tyrant's articles are on previously existing ones, we now have to square that. And because this is a J based on Bread Tyrant's clone of another highly abstract article. Did that make sense? Because that's what's up. That's what happened just now. It's been ratioed a little bit. It's got 19 comments to 10 upvotes, so that's always a little iffy, but it is surviving. I'm not going to really cover this one because it's super short. It's not even that funny to me, and unfortunately, if you look at the discussion, it's basically because, once again, it really demands that you have a very set knowledge base of something that's very obtuse or potentially completely unfamiliar to readers such as myself. This one apparently is Team Fortress 2 with red and blue, so it kind of riffs on the red and the blue designation here, and steers it towards Team Fortress 2. Of course, I'm old enough I'm such an old guy that when I see that, I think of the Halo videos, red versus blue. So that's how old I am. Of course, I never played Team Fortress 2 because I'm a Luddite. Anyway, but then I thought that I always love to see great comments left in here. And there is one in here that I wanted to look at. It looks like, again, for the second time, it is Lord X bumping this thing on the head with some excellent crit. So this one says, this largely feels and reads like the kind of unfunny pop culture reference J that were culled in the first mass edit. Holy shit. Get it. I would try to leave a more substantial critique. This gets even better. I would try to leave a more substantial critique, but there's just so little to critique about a pop culture in joke that's only funny to people in on the joke. I mean, it's just, God, man, what a fantastic comment, and obviously we could apply that to a lot of things. Okay, this is our last one, 6466, and what a fucking doozy to end on. Yeah, Brian, why don't you send us off?
A deer that had abnormal and disturbingly human physical characteristics, seemingly doctored post-death to be more passably deer.
Yeah, so if you didn't catch that, this is an anomalous deer that seems to have been disturbingly modified to have more human characteristics, but it's actually the opposite of that. Hate to ruin it for you, but this is a fucking good article. Holy shit. It's by an author who tells us who he is, which I hate, but at the same time, I'm starting to like Ekronak quite a lot. I think he's sort of an up-and-coming author who's just incredibly talented, so I always look forward to seeing the next installment by Ekronak. Most of his stuff is a little longer than this, so this is a little shorter than the previous work that we've seen by this author, so that's nice, but it honestly feels shorter than it looks, because did I see this update? Yeah, I did. Because the dialogue is really good. I think this is like one of the more believable of the mobile task forces that I've seen enacted recently. Just seems to have a very decent, realistic grasp of tactical decisions and believable interactions between the people who are cast here. Just small stuff like leaving this Darun guy at the beginning of the cave, and it's pleasant that nothing happens to the team when they split up. That was a surprise. But this is just a really tense article. I don't know that it shouldn't be an X because it's basically dismissed at the end here. Oh my God, the ACS actually looks good. What the fuck just happened? Wow, this actually looks good. So congratulations to Ekronak, excuse me. Congratulations to Ekronak. This is the first time that I've seen the ACS look like really fucking good. I haven't seen it look good before that. And I've been looking. And then I wanted to go to one comment in here, and because there's a really good comment. And it is by, of all people, it is by Agent Jackrabbit, who I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised, has a really good comment here. You are such a pro at finding ways to turn otherwise boring clinical language into a narrative hook. The whole thing was so unsettling and sad. When I got to the end and saw the updated object class, I audibly sighed. Good. Don't know what that says about me, but I think you successfully took your readers on the ride you intended for them to go on. Yeah, I mean, it's seriously good. I would be interested to read these people who didn't give it a good reviews take. Because, yeah, this is a pretty easy win for Ekronak, who hasn't missed yet, by the way, as far as I'm understanding. This guy is not missing, so it's a little scary. But rating is 54 in just a day. So, I think that's... I don't think this could ever be... I don't think this article's rating could ever be outsized to its quality. It's short, it's punchy, it's so tense, it's like staccato tense. Yeah. The whole time I thought that when I was reading this, I thought that the pace suffered just a bit. There's this part in what happens where it just like, you think something's going to happen, you're just like waiting and it just never happens. And there's this moment where you're like, okay, something should have happened by now, did the rhythm just hiccup? Like something should have happened by now. And then it never happens. And then because it never happens, you're like, oh man, that was a great moment. because it's like you think it's a missed beat because you expect something to happen, but when nothing happens, you kind of retroactively recontextualize it, and you go, okay, that worked really well. It was like that handshake that lasted just a little too long, you know, and you're kind of like, let go of my hand, you know, but the guy ended up giving you like a raise later. I don't know. It's weird. Weird analogy. My brain is gone. My brain is completely unfolded by now after 3 hours. This is tough. So, definitely recommend this read. This is an excellent, excellent article. Great image work too, by the way. Excellent image work. Yeah, look how human that eye looks. Nice. All right, so those are all the articles that we. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, there was one more. Okay, there was one more, but it's gone. Yeah, looks like somebody deleted an article because it was doing well. The rating was fine. Looks like they just self-deleted. It was an ESL article that was posted, I think, this morning or yesterday, and it was just bad. I felt bad, but it's just bad. All kind of stuff. I couldn't. Just an absolute mess. Terrible mess. I hate that. Hate that for him because I can't write anything in another language. So like that's really impressive to me. But sorry, doesn't belong here. All right. Well, appreciate you joining. We are going to have once again a gauntlet style, highly hyper condensed version of this to come out on the Confic Magazine YouTube in the next couple of days, where basically I just assign 5 words to every single one of these SCPs and just spout through them very quickly in about a minute. So we'll do that. Everything that I said can be collapsed into about a minute. So that's what the Weekend Collapsible is about. Thank you all for joining on this extendo stream of 3 hours. I got a feeling most of these on Friday night will be this way. Of course, every Friday night we review the previous week of SCPs in great detail, going from Thursday to Thursday, and we'll do it again next week. And then I take the weekend off from streaming on nights, but weeknightly I'm on stream on Twitch at 7:30 p.m. That's Central Standard Time. And we basically just look at containment fiction media. Right now we're in the middle of a podcast from Special Containment Podcast that features pataphysics with, what's his name? Placeholder, McDoctorate, Dookity-Doo, Dr. Cubed, Dr. Square Cubed. And yeah, that's going very interesting. So join us. That'll be, the next time is on Monday. But in the meantime, you can check us out tomorrow. We got our main show, SCP Meta, coming out tomorrow. This is 11 a.m. CST, where we basically have a call-in. You can call in. You can come here, share your thoughts, let your voice be heard. We also have a phone number. There's the number right there on the screen, 316-444-3115. You can call that during the hour we are live, and we'll take your call live. And if you're too shy, you can always leave a voicemail. We'll listen to the voicemail. You know, we accept comments, questions, criticisms, whatever. We are ready for it all. So check those things out coming down. And thank you all so much for joining me tonight. This has been, that's how you say my name, SCP-CRNP, a.k.a. Lack of Lepers. And thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. Hopefully see you tomorrow. If not, maybe I'll see you Monday night. Peace.